Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is August 28th, 2024, 4:19 p.m. We're broadcasting live today from the Mormon Stories studios, somewhere in a undisclosed hidden bunker in somewhere in Utah or in the Mountain West. Is that clandestine enough, y'all?
Yes, good.
Is that good? We're joined by the Queen. And when I
Yes.
say the Queen, I mean Sandra Tanner. Hey, Sandra.
Hi.
And by the King, Gerardo Simano. Hey, Gerardo.
There we go.
Hey, John.
So this is a wide shot of the King and Queen. Somebody used to make a meme with the crowns on their head. But we're here today to talk about the thumbnail is Top Mormon Historian Admits Issues Raised in CES Letter. And it's a really fascinating story. Basically, recently, the CES Letter and Jeremy Runnells have been under attack. Again, we have to assume he's under attack because, like Sandra, he's been so successful. Do they come after successful people, Sandra? Do they come after people that are effective in
It
moving
seems
the
that
needle?
way.
So they're coming after Jeremy full force. We're going to talk about it today. And interestingly, they brought on Richard Bushman, Dr. Richard Bushman, Columbia emeritus professor, former stake president, former patriarch. They brought him on, world's most renowned Joseph Smith scholar. They brought him on an anti-CES Letter YouTube channel to comment on the CES Letter. And to all of our amazement, I mean, our interpretation was that he pretty much validated most of what Jeremy writes in the CES Letter. You're laughing, Gerardo.
Yeah, I mean, he did. But I mean, some interesting arguments here and there that we're going to be discussing. But
we'll let you be the judge. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We also have not in studio, we have joining us remotely from an undisclosed satellite location in a bunker somewhere in the Midwest. We have Julia. Hey, Julia.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, of course.
And Julia has been helping us with the LDS discussion series. She's our resident historian. Sandra, you're sort of our emeritus.
Retired.
Emeritus.
Yeah.
Your Mormon Stories is emeritus historian. And Julia sits in the Sandra Tanner chair
Oh, well, good.
of history for Mormon Stories podcast.
Glad to pass the wand on.
Are you okay with that characterization, Julia?
I don't think I could ever take Sandra's place, so I don't know.
Well, it's an endowed chair
There you go.
in her name. I think we started pretty silly. Okay, let's get more serious. Anyway, we welcome our live audience. Maven is gracious enough to join us in the live chats. She's going to star any questions or comments that she thinks we should pay attention to. She's going to ban all the baddies. And please share. Please feel free to make your comments on YouTube with Super Chat donations. That'll make sure your question or comment gets read. And then finally, we want to thank all the Mormon Stories donors that make all this possible. But also we want to make a call for people to apply to be on Mormon Stories. So we have a new website. Gerardo was instrumental, along with my friend Dave, in designing it and upgrading the website. And we have a new application process for people who want to be on Mormon Stories. And we're looking for certain types of interviews for the next couple months. We're looking for anyone who wants to share kind of a young single adult dating experience and what that's like to try and date Mormons in the modern age, preferably someone in their 20s to early 30s, and someone who's willing to just be candid about the dating experience. That's the YSA panel that we hope to do. We've got a couple people for that. We're looking for people, if anybody wants to be a part of a panel on infertility, we're looking for one or two more people to be on that. And then we're looking for grandparents. We're looking for people who experienced a faith crisis later in their life as grandparents in their golden years, their 50s, their 60s, their 70s, even their 80s. And we would love to interview some couples who are grandparents who experienced their faith crisis at that point. And then we're always interested in just people who are superstar Mormons. And what I mean by that is they were in it to win it kind of Leah and Cody Young, Donna Showalter types, former bishops, former Relief Society presidents, just people who are really intensely, devoutly Mormon. We're always looking for those types of stories. If you fit any of those, or if you just have a really cool story that you want to tell, go to mormonstories.org and apply to be on the show. We would love to have you. Okay, that's enough business. Now, Gerardo, I think you're kind of leading us in today's episode. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, along with Julia, we both together worked on this, on putting together the clips that we're going to show. I think you wanted to cover a little bit of the background of what's been going on with the CES letter. I did wanted to say that it seems like this YouTube channel is an independent organization. As far as I could tell this morning, I was trying to do some research on it. They don't seem to be associated with, one of the organizations that we know most, like More Good and Book of Mormon Central and others.
But aren't they all funded by shadow nonprofits?
Yeah, I mean, we can never know. What's interesting, there's no way to donate on their website, but I did think it was a really different approach than some of the slides you're going to share by Meridian. Like their website, the way they talk about Jeremy is as if he was a sincere believer, who was actually having questions, and even the way that Bushman talks about him and the host are pretty respectful towards Jeremy, in my opinion.
Yeah,
very different tone from these other attacks, but it is kind of interesting that it's all coming at once, right?
I feel very confident that the CES letters, and so that's one of the things I guess we should just talk about. The organization is calling itself CES Letters, plural. I would imagine Jeremy Runnells would have something to say about the fact that they're basically taking his branding and exploiting it for SEO purposes. Maybe he'll have more to say about that, but it's called CES Letters. And my sense is it's a coordinated effort, because why would all of these different independent publications basically be promoting it all at the same time?
Yeah.
Possible?
Definitely possible.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, do you want me to do these first couple slides, or
sure.
do you want to, do you want to do it? Okay. Is that you?
Go ahead.
Okay. So, y'all will be familiar with Meridian Magazine. Meridian Magazine has been sort of an online web zine for many, many years, that defends the church, does faith promoting stuff, but also attacks critics of the church. Maureen Proctor is one of the leaders of Meridian Magazine. And so here is a new article by Maureen Proctor, and it's entitled "Unveiling the Truth, the Real Story Behind the CES Letter." Does that look like an AI-generated photo, Gerardo?
Yeah.
It does. I mean, unless it's an actor. What do you think, Julia? Is that an AI?
I think it's absolutely AI.
Okay. And how would you describe that, Julia, that photo?
It's a man. He looks like a Hugh Jackman type with glasses, and he's like really, really trying to look into this book, like trying to think about stuff.
He's got like a furrowed brow, but he's a beard. So, Sandra, what do we think about people with beards?
Oh, they aren't faithful.
So he's got a beard and he's got a furrowed brow, and so Maureen Proctor is going to unveil the truth, the real story behind the CES letter. Another one is Public Square magazine. As I understand it, this publication may have been started in coordination with Ralph Hancock, an old professor of mine. Anyway, the article in Public Square is entitled "The True Origins of the CES Letter." This one, it says C.D. Cunningham. I don't know who that is. And then also research by Michael, does that say Peterson, Julia?
Yeah, that looks like Peterson.
Published piece. And then the next one is again published piece. And it says, "Were these ever the sincere questions of an earnest truth seeker?" And it's written by Michael Peterson and Jacob Hess. Now, Jacob Hess is a name that we've covered on Mormon Stories podcast before. Gerardo, do you remember covering Jacob Hess?
I was not on the episode, but you covered it with Kara. I think you did a response to one of his videos. Apologetics.
Yeah. Yep. And I see him as, I think he's almost inheriting the mantle of Daniel Peterson, not as a legitimate scholar. I think he has a PhD in some family-focused family studies kind of PhD.
Mm.
I don't think it's clinical or counseling psychology, but somewhere in Indiana, I think. And I think he writes for the Deseret News now. He's actually one of the writers on the Deseret News. Sandra, is it fair to call the Deseret News a propaganda newspaper for the church these days, or is that unfair?
Well, from an apostate point of view, I would think that sounded fair.
Julia, does that seem fair to you, or?
Yeah, that's probably fair.
Okay. All right. So Jacob, of course, now writes with them. You know who else writes? There's another former, do you remember the kind of BYU female, Hannah, no.
Oh, wait, who?
She used to work Book
oh.
of Abraham stuff.
Oh my gosh, what's her name?
You have to look it up.
Dixon, Everett, Judd. I don't know. I'm
I
just
can't
listing out people
remember.
from
I can't
BYU.
remember.
You know what I'm talking
Redhead.
about. She was doing articles with Brian Hauglid about Book of Abraham. You know who I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You look it up. Just a recent faith writer for Deseret News Religion. She's writing for them, and Jacob Hess. So they're really going apologetic with the Deseret News. Anyway, this article really goes after Jeremy, and we're just going to share the bullets of basically the allegations they're making. That basically, Jeremy was an adversarial church bashing person long before the CES letter was written. The whole purpose of this is to smear Jeremy's reputation. It's basic poison the well ad hominem. The CES letter, based on Sandra's good work, is, I'm sure, harming the church. And so what are they going to do, Sandra? If you don't have good arguments, what do?
You do spin.
And you attack the author, right?
Yes.
You attack the author.
Hannah Syriac.
Hannah
And I
Syriac.
believe she was doing stuff with John Gee.
Okay,
I think if she had done with Brian Hauglid, she would have come the other way.
Yeah. So Hannah Syriac and Jacob Hess are writing for the Deseret News. Who knew? Anyway, we wish them well. So here's some of the examples of how they're poisoning the well with Jeremy. That he was adversarial church bashing before the letter was written, that he was disinterested in available and established channels for member questions. Yes, if he had just gone to the right channels, he could have got all the right answers, right, Sandra?
Well, yes, if it had gone to the right ones.
And pray tell, which are the right channels to get the right answers?
Just anything except those put out by BYU.
I mean, what do you think they mean? The gospel topic essays? I mean,
Had they come out?
I don't even know.
No,
there wasn't anything
No, they
like
weren't out
that.
yet. They weren't out yet.
Where would he have turned?
I mean, Farms, Maxwell Institute, Fair Mormon. But that's all garbage. We all know that stuff's garbage.
Yeah.
Like,
it's evident that it's not working, right? That's why they keep attacking
exactly. It's just not. It's not, and that's why so many people are leaving the church,
right?
Because Fair Mormon, Maxwell Institute, they're not, and Farms is gone. So I mean, where was Jeremy supposed to turn anyway? 3, seeking feedback from church antagonists prior to publication. I wonder who he means.
Oh dear. Oh no.
Is that you? Did Jeremy ever meet with you?
I think he read our Shadow of Reality.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know that I was in touch much with Jeremy before CES letter. So I don't know. Reddit. I think he means the ex-Mormon Reddit. 4, public statements revealing a much broader intended audience. So they're basically saying he was always intending the CES letter to be published to the world to embarrass the church.
Well, if you are somewhat, I mean, I think he acknowledges from the letter at the beginning, because I read it just a few weeks ago, that he already is not a believer, and that really doesn't matter if the CS director responds or whatever he tells him, because he already kind of decided that there's not really good answers, but he's still open. So I don't know, they're trying to portray him as like he was still believing when he wrote the letter. That's not what Jeremy has ever tried to portray from what I read.
But this is the same tack they were using when Gerald and I started questioning back in 1959. We were listening to the enemies of the church. I was listening to Gerald. I mean, it was just, it passed the buck. Everything was because we listened to somebody else.
You listened to Fawn Brody.
Yes, we read apostate literature. So of course we were having problems. And I went into my bishop about this, and the guy he brings in to be the big answer man, he says, well, if you'll just read Joseph Fielding Smith's books, Answers to Gospel Questions and Doctrines of Salvation, it will solve all these things. The game hasn't changed.
It has not changed.
It's just the people that are writing the material has changed,
Yeah.
but the arguments haven't changed.
No, I'm so glad you're here.
And what I was going to say also, if I'm going to write a letter to a CS director, take all the time to gather all the answers, of course I'm going to want to publish whatever his response is going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so dumb. It's so dumb. All right, really quickly. 5 is textual similarities mirroring other published dissidents. Again, I'm sure they're probably do you think the CS letter borrowed from your work?
Oh,
Sandra?
I think Jeremy acknowledges that he read our Mormonism Shadow of Reality first, that it was part of his process of figuring out the real story.
Yeah.
We look to Fawn Brody. I mean, yes, each of us builds on those that have gone before, but it's because the evidence is there. It isn't just that we're just mimicking the guy before. It's that we read the guy before and checked out the references. It's that, well, that makes sense. Yes, this is the real story.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, why where else are you going to go? Like, if you want if Jeremy, let's just say it's 2012, and Jeremy wants the truth about Mormonism, where else is he going to go? But Mormon Think, Sandra Tanner, Shadow and Reality, Fawn Brody, Mormon Stories. Where else is he going to go?
Plus, why does it matter? Why does any of this matter?
Yeah.
If the questions are valid.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, the Gospel Topics essays were created. Why? Because whatever the church was putting out was inadequate.
Right.
Am I wrong?
Right. Well, I mean, you got the problem starts back with Joseph Smith. The neighbors all said he was involved in magic.
Yeah.
And everyone's just been pointing that out ever since. And the church just, like Bushman, they want to downplay what the neighbors said.
Right.
So just because I tell you what the neighbors said doesn't invalidate the fact that's what the neighbors were saying about the origins of Mormonism.
Absolutely.
It all came out of magic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Julie, you jump in anytime you want. All right.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks to Jake for the super chat. Those are really helpful. Okay. We'll just quickly do some of the others. He took a hostile and disparaging tone in the original essay. In other words, you're not allowed to be angry. If you're upset, if you're angry, if you feel betrayed, you have to hide that, because anger is an illegitimate emotion that I guess apparently disqualifies you.
Disqualifies their questions, I guess.
Yeah.
Or the facts.
I mean,
Yeah, you just found out that the fellow that sold you all those stocks was not really buying anything with that money, but he bought a Cadillac, and you sound hostile when you find this out and go to question him about it. You just have a bad attitude.
I mean, honestly, being angry shows he was sincere. Like if he wasn't angry and he was just all calm, and then it would show that he didn't really passionately
care about it,
right?
Right.
And if you watch his Mormon Stories interview, it's really obvious Jeremy cared and tried and believed. Anyway, it's so dumb. 7, immediately promoting and personally disseminating the letter online. The church with 80,000 missionaries and how many missionary couples are criticizing people for evangelizing or publishing.
Yes. Who has the biggest publishing outfit?
Yeah. Somehow publishing is a bad thing.
I guess.
Okay. Disparaging attitudes and manipulative actions towards church leaders. So he's mad at church leaders. I guess that's inappropriate. Discrediting. Extensive and ongoing branding expansion efforts over subsequent years. So the fact that he improved the CES letter, created a website, even he actually made a new version to improve the tone, take out things that were inaccurate and that sounded too angry or hostile. And so they want it both ways. They want to criticize him for being angry, but when he improves it to make it less angry, they're going to say that he made edits over time. Does that seem weird?
Well, they've made edits on theirs over time. I mean,
They stopped dating the edits on the Gospel Topics essays. They changed them so much. I hear they put out new Gospel Topics essays just this week. Did y'all hear
What?
that?
I heard
Yeah.
something about it, but I haven't checked it out.
Yeah, there's like 4 new essays, so we need
Oh,
to get on
dang.
that. LDS discussions, Julie, we need to get on that.
Yes.
All right, last one is malicious personal attacks upon many who dared to disagree. Oh, they're getting on Jeremy for malicious personal attacks. What is this whole article? Like, are these people like? Are these serious? Are these
Yeah.
people serious?
Uh,
They're getting after Jeremy for personal attacks with
personal attack.
his personal attack. These people are not serious.
Yeah.
These are not serious people. Okay. So anyway, I want to give a personal message. Julie, I want you to make this an Instagram and a TikTok clip. And I want
Perfect.
you to tag Jacob Hess, Hannah Syriac, CES Letters, and Maureen Proctor of Meridian Magazine. Okay. We are doing this episode, and I will continue to do episodes promoting the CES Letter. We haven't talked about the CES Letter as a feature in a long time on Mormon Stories. All right. But because you have chosen Jacob Hess, Maureen Proctor, all you people, because you've chosen to go after Jeremy and attack his character, I'm going to dedicate many, 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 many episodes on Mormon Stories to the CES Letter until you take down your disparaging attacks on Jeremy Runnells. So just know you are Jeremy's best friend in promoting the CES Letter as long as you continue these attacks. Mark my words, we are going to do a deep dive into the CES Letter over the next 12 months. Thanks to you with our subscriber base of 250,000 people. Thank you, Jacob Hess. You're doing the Lord's work. Okay. Without any further ado, Gerardo, take it away.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's dive in. So I think you already gave a little bit of an introduction of this channel and website CS Letters. Do you want to put?
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. So here it is.
So that's the website.
Yeah. Another reason why I don't think it's associated with More Good is the branding looks a little bit homemade, and it's More Good when they do things. They do things by the hundreds of thousands of
Well,
dollars.
why would you even want to
I don't know.
create that appearance, that connection isn't there?
I don't know. I'm just saying. I tried to research it hard, and this seems a little bit
So far.
smaller, but I don't know.
All right.
Who knows?
Okay.
Yeah, that slide is the YouTube channel. So they have like less than 400 people. So
They're
Yeah.
about to have a few more.
Yes. And so they have a few videos where they're responding or, in a faithful way to certain aspects of the CS Letter. So for the section on the translation of the Book of Mormon, regarding the seer stone and how the Book of Mormon was translated, they brought Richard Bushman, who is an expert in Joseph Smith. And I think there's you and Sandra have an expertise on who Richard Bushman is. And do you want to talk about it?
Oh, Sandra, do you want me to?
Well, he's written numerous books on the early Joseph Smith period since back in he was in writing in 1980s forward. I don't remember when he first started writing on Mormon issues, but he's been out there for 40, 50 years at least.
Actually, let me just say what I do know. When Leonard Arrington was church historian,
Yeah,
he was commissioned to do like a 10-volume series on the church history
right.
with like a book for every 10 years of the church's history for the maybe 15 for the sesquicentennial.
Yes.
Would that have been 150?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And so Richard Bushman was asked to write the book on the beginning years of Joseph Smith's life.
Mm.
And so he wrote the book, Joseph Smith and the Beginnings of Early Mormonism, which for me was one of the most damaging books to my faith back in 2000, 2001, because I had read Fawn Brody, but in my mind, it's like, well, she's an apostate, so I'm going to hold everything she says with a grain of salt. But then when I read Joseph Smith and the Beginnings of Early Mormonism, and as a patriarch and as a stake president, and he may not have been a patriarch back then, but I think he was a stake president, but as a faithful, eminent Mormon historian, he was validating all the same stuff that Fawn Brody, wrote in No Man Knows My History. That was actually more devastating to my testimony than Fawn Brody was. So anyway, that's how he got his start. And then my understanding is he just imported Joseph Smith and the Beginnings of Early Mormonism into Rough Stone Rolling. that was the first several chapters, was like an update and a rewrite of that original book. And then he continued and wrote about the rest of his life in Rough Stone Rolling.
Right. And in Rough Stone Rolling, you will find that he references Fawn Brody's book in the footnotes all the way through. He validates many of the things that Brody brings out. He just wants to give a softer landing to what you conclude from it. So yes, the Smiths were involved in magic. Yes, they were involved in money digging. Yes, there's different accounts of the first vision.
History said he did a.
Keep going. Sorry.
And so he admits all these things, but he wants to soften it by fuzzying the conclusions to make it palatable to you. But it's still, I think, a very disturbing story when you admit that he's using a rock in the hat. How do you make that sound reasonable in today's world? So even though he wants to say it's reasonable, obviously many Mormons today are struggling with even the soft version of admitting Joseph's magic and money digging.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Really quickly, I'm just going to show the YouTube channel, and they've got, Stephen Harper talking about the priesthood restoration. They've got Brian Hales talking about polygamy. So they've got all the
main
they've got Stephen Smoot talking about the Book of Abraham. So they're going to be getting the best and the brightest. I anticipate that this is good, and everyone is trying to just go at the CES letter for specific subjects.
Yeah.
And undermine it.
Well, what's so shocking though is about Richard Bushman, in my view, acknowledging a lot of this. I mean, just like Sandra said, he does the same thing in the video as he did on his book Rough Stone Rolling, admitting of all these things that can be problematic, but then trying to soften them. And that's what I think would be really interesting for us to try to respond to his arguments as to why you should come out of it as a believer, even though it's really kind of shocking.
So that's what we're going to be doing today, is responding to Richard Bushman's interview on the CES Letters YouTube channel. And this is just part one of a multi-part series. Now, Jacob Hess, if you go to Marine and all these people and shut all this down and stop cheating Jeremy and using his name, smearing him, violating his trademark or whatever it is, his brand, and attacking the person, then maybe I'll stop this series. But until then, I'm going to do it. Here's the slide that they put together on Richard Bushman, 3 of his books. We already mentioned Rough Stone Rolling. There's also a new book called Joseph Smith's Gold Plates. And then there's one called Believing History. Joseph Smith, The Beginnings of Early Mormonism, it's in there. So we're going to just dive in, right? And start responding.
Yeah.
And we have Sandra here, along with Julia and Gerardo, to provide their reactions. Now, Sandra, how many times have you watched this video?
Oh, at least 4 times.
Wow.
Maybe 5.
You're prepared.
I don't know, but I've listened.
All right. That. Well, we're really excited for your reactions. And Julia, you jump right in, okay?
Sure.
Okay. And who's this dude? Who's this guy?
This is the host. This is the guy that hosts the YouTube channel. His name is Easton. I don't know his last name. I don't think he's this essay or in this video. He doesn't say his last name, so I don't know if other viewers or other people would know. But it's Easton, and I don't know anything about him. I couldn't find anything in their about page. So.
I mean, just the fact that he's getting Richard Bushman shows that he's got endorsements from the church.
Right? Yeah, I don't think he's the owner of it.
I mean, if Smoot doesn't Smoot work for BYU at some level? Like,
I'm not sure.
These are the church's all-star apologists.
I mean, getting Richard Bushman is a big deal.
So so I am betting that the church money is behind this, whether or not it's more good directly. I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's Easton. Is that his name? I'll try and remember that.
Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and jump, and we'll just play the first clip, and then we'll have the panel react. And we hope you viewers and listeners will give your responses too, and we'll have Maven's been starring him, so we're in good shape.
Sorry, one thing. Yeah. I think another thing what I thought it was really important to cover this is because if you are someone who has family members who are still believing, which I think we all do, This is a really good episode, even not ours, but the episode with Richard Bushman to send to them so they can learn about the true history of how the Book of Mormon was translated.
Wait, what are you saying?
I'm saying that it's a really good introduction for a believing member that has believed.
Oh, so Gerardo's recommending if you've got believing family and friends and you don't want to send them the CES letter,
Right?
Send them the CES letters, and that'll be a great introduction to the CES letter.
Yeah.
By showing them CES letters because hey, Richard Bushman's on it. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. And lots of BYU people and good things, so it's safe, right, Sandra?
Well, one would hope, I guess.
Let's look at it
Really quick. Thanks to Jake again for the super chat. Thanks to Cairo's Fury. And then I don't get this joke. The Sandy Stone writes CES letters is Stephen H's first presidency assignment. Do we know what Sandy Stone's talking about there, Julia? Any idea?
I don't. Stephen H.
Yeah. All right. Well, he'll have to tell us what he means in his joke. And we love Colby. So Colby writes, all due respect to Jeremy, but it's honestly kind of funny. The apologists are still coming after him for the CES letter.
After 11 years.
I mean, it's because it's been devastating to the church.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously it is affecting a lot of people, or they wouldn't have all these responses.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, attacks mean you're being successful in this church. Okay, well, let's go ahead and roll the first clip.
Richard, as we get started, we're going to be talking all about the Book of Mormon translation. And I think that there's some important context to give before we dive into the actual topic of what does the translation process look like. So I want to just kind of run through some of the dates and who is involved. So Joseph Smith has his first vision in 1820. He eventually receives the golden plates in 1827. Is that right? I think. After he receives the plates, he receives those in September of 1827. When does he begin the actual translation process, and who does he start the translation process with?
There's a little bit of dispute. The sources differ a little bit on it. The 1838 version of history said he did a little bit of translating shortly after he got the plates. So it'd be in the fall.
Sure.
Of 1827. And he took this, Martin Harris took that translation as well as the characters from the plates to Charles Anthon. The other sources say Joseph Smith was buffaloed by the problem of how to translate. And it wasn't until the winter after Martin Harris came back that he really began translating in earnest. So there's a little disjuncture there, which hasn't been explained. But the fact is that time when he sat down and the translation just flowed from him, and he sat there day after day, that begins in the winter of 1828.
Okay. And so...
Okay. So what's interesting, I mean, the premise here is that Richard Bushman, by and large, admits whatever's in the book, whatever's in the CES letter. What's interesting about that clip? Anyone want to share, Gerardo?
Yeah, I mean, I could start.
Yeah.
But I'm sure.
Sandra, do you want to go first? Go ahead, Sandra.
Well, my thought was that this, for the Mormon, this implies that there was this short period of composing the book, and he's making it to this 28-29 frame. But you have to understand that Joseph first started talking about the Book of Mormon in 1823. And so he's had years to get his story practiced and put together mentally before he starts dictating it. So to me, the length of the dictation process is just the culmination of him writing his story. So
Right.
there, you have to understand that it wasn't something that just suddenly popped on the scene in just this very short time.
Yeah.
Got it.
Something I hadn't understood until recently is that and if you can put the other slide up, John, because Julia was gracious enough to put up all
The
the date
timeline.
and the timeline of what that's from the moment that Joseph started talking about the plates. And like Sandra said, it's he starts pretty early. He starts in September of 1823. And
Okay, so you want me to show that slide? Okay,
Yeah.
I'll show it right here. There you go.
And something I hadn't understood until recently is that he was not just telling stories. And I could get that wrong. And please, for anyone, if I'm wrong, just correct me on the comments. But my understanding recently from an interview that Dan Vogel did was that he was not just like sitting around and telling the stories to his family about the Indians in the area. He was actually telling the stories that he was channeling from the plates through the stone. So he was already kind of doing and practicing some kind of translation or like channeling of whatever was on the plates as early as this date.
So he was storytelling with the stone,
Yeah.
not long before he ever got
Well,
to translate it. Is that what
And
you're
Julia,
saying?
do you
right.
want
I just want to say not only that. So if you read, you can go directly. You can go to archive.org and look up his mother's book, the life of Joseph Smith. I can't remember what it's called.
Lucy's book, whatever.
Yeah,
it
Lucy
is?
Mack Smith's book.
Biographical sketches.
Right, exactly. And then so what she says is that Joseph Smith started telling stories in 1823 and told his family not to tell these stories to anyone else. What stories were told in the home stayed in the home, which I think is really interesting, especially if you think of Joseph as an author or a writer, to like not, he hasn't published his work yet. He doesn't want to share it. So like, that's how I think of it as, is that he doesn't want this to be out there yet because it hasn't been published.
Like he's protecting the IP and he doesn't want it to get out there.
That's kind of interesting. Yeah. But anyway, I don't know. Just like I knew that he had been telling the stories about the Indians early on. I just didn't know that he was like, that he was a little bit more developed to the fact that he was actually channeling the plates that were on the hill.
Yeah. And that speaks to how long he had to think up the narrative and the stories in the Book of Mormon in his mind. Is that right, Sandra?
Right. So he's rehearsing his story, not just entertaining the family. He's rehearsing his story of the whole Book of Mormon scenario.
7 years before it ends up getting publishing.
Right.
Which kills the 6 weeks or whatever.
They want to make it this short amount of time.
60 days, I think.
That he's just simply dictating the story.
Okay.
Richard Bushman is also leaving out the 116 pages, which we don't have, and we don't know how good or bad they were, which would have served as practice for if you believe that he was, making the story up. So he did have some period of practice with Martin Harris before this period of where Richard Bushman says that he sat day after day with Emma and just dictating the plates, because there's the 116 pages too.
Yeah, and we've covered on LDS discussions, when the 116 pages gets lost, and then he sort of picks up at whatever book in the book is it Mosiah, where he picks up in Mosiah, finishes it because it was clearly working from some basic text and set of stories. Mm-hmm. And then he has to go back and start over and replace the beginning.
Right.
Yeah. Was there anything else we want to say about this slide, this timeline?
Well, if we show the other clip, it kind of supplements this slide as well. Do you want to just play?
Oh, the second clip?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll play that right now. Here we go.
Translation process starts. How long does that translation process take? When is he finally finished translating the Book of Mormon?
He finally finishes in the summer of 1828. So he did it in spurts, with Martin Harris up through June of 1827, then a hiatus, then through the fall and winter, probably doing some translation with Emma. Oliver Cowdery arrives in the spring of 1829, and then they finish it up by June of 1829.
Very good.
All right, Sandra, the reactions.
Well, like I said before, that's just when he's giving the final telling of his story, but it's not the limited time that he has to create it.
Right.
We're also seeing, something that's really interesting of the work that Dan Vogel has done is looking at what Joseph Smith was translating translating during that period and looking at what was happening in his surroundings, when he starts translating Mosiah, and the section where he says, like, if you have ever borrowed anything from your neighbor and don't return it, that's like a sin. And that's around the time, when Martin Harris has taken the 116 pages and not returning them, or it happens to be like when Emma is the one doing the scribing. All of a sudden, there's this part on the Book of Mormon where he talks about, the babies that are that died before they know the truth. They're saved in Jesus, which, for Emma would have been really important because that was something she had experienced.
Children die.
Yeah, so things that are happening in his surround. Not only he had time to prepare the story for many years, but also it is clear that whatever's making it into the Book of Mormon is somewhat related to what's going on Joseph Smith's story at the time he's translating.
Yeah.
Well, and then to add to that, you have Dan Vogel also pointed out that he right away in Mosiah at the beginning of what was saved, he saves Alvin, where he says those who haven't heard the gospel will be able to hear it in the spirit realm and then be able to accept it. So right away he's saving Alvin.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Wow.
And then as the story goes on, when you have the Masons and the problem of what's his name, Morgan, that ends up dead, that's attributed to the Masonic people getting rid of him. And you have a big Masonic uproar in the 27, which causes a big backlash against everything Mason. And so then you find in the Book of Mormon, we suddenly get the Gantianton robbers and people that swear an oath
Secret
on their life.
Yeah.
And so it seems to be, the Book of Mormon story seems to be including, as he goes along, events that are happening outside of the book. Why else would you suddenly have this secret society thrown into the Book of Mormon story? It's just convenient that it happens right at the same time as you have the Masonic uproar over Captain Morgan.
Yeah. It's William Morgan. Is that right?
Yeah, William Morgan.
Yeah. And if you want to learn more about that, just Google the anti-Mason William Morgan affair. And weren't there judges involved in exonerating the Masons? And so this idea of corrupt judges in the Book of Mormon comes from that as well.
Yeah.
So Julia, do you want to take us through the rest of the timeline real quick, or Gerardo, either one?
My main things are the ones I bolded in red. So the top where you have those extra 4 years where Joseph's telling these stories to his family. And then you have this, Richard Bushman kind of brushes it off, but the 9 months or so of him taking this break because he loses the 116 pages. I think those 2 points are very crucial in the writing process, in my view, of how he's coming up with these stories.
So if he takes a break from July to March after he loses the 116 pages, it's pretty obvious he's writing what becomes the replacement, what becomes Nephi to Mosiah. He's writing that, right? It's not the Lord made him stop and gave him a stupor. It's that he's got to go come up with a replacement so that he can finish the book that he's already written, but now come up with a new beginning. Is that right?
Yes. And isn't it interesting that it takes him a while to figure it out, but then God tells him, well, we got this all worked out. Don't panic, because if you just look at those plates again, you'll find there's this small set that's more religious. And so this is going to be an even better book now. So don't worry, Joseph. We're going to switch over to this other set that's going to have all this better stuff anyways. So forget trying to reconstruct Nephi's war stories or who's king. We'll just skip over to some bunch of chapters of Isaiah, and we can fill in the same number of pages that are missing and make it look like all's well.
And if this episode weren't awesome enough, we've got Dan Vogel in the comments, and Dan writes, secret combinations was introduced in Helaman during a disputed election similar to Andrew Jackson in the 1828 election, and Andrew Jackson was a Mason. Dan, we warmly welcome any comments you want to share today. Dan Vogel's a legend. Check out his books, his many books from Signature Books. he's a legend. Okay, Julie, anything else you want to say about that, about the timeline?
No, I think those are the main things.
Okay. All right. All right. So should we go to the next clip?
Let's do it.
All right, let's go to the next clip.
I'm going to jump over to the CES letter. This section of the CES letter, the Book of Mormon Translation, actually starts with a quote from you. Very, very famous. But one of the things that the authors of the author of the CES letter is really trying to focus on is you ask the question, what in the world are the plates for? Why do we need them on the table if they are just wrapped into a cloth while he looked into a seer stone? What does the translation process actually look like? Is he reading the plates and looking at them as we've seen much artwork show? Is he looking into a hat with the seer stones? Is he looking into the breastplate with the spectacles, the Urim and Thummim? What does it look like?
There was one picture that showed him like a conventional translator sitting there with his finger on the plates and then
Right.
writing it down. That's totally inaccurate. He was either looking at the seer stone or looking through the Urim and Thummim stones, the crystals, one way or the other, and dictating.
So he probably did both, I guess is what you're saying?
Well, the best guess we could come up with, I think, is that he looked through the crystals using the Urim and Thummim while he was with Martin Harris up through June
Okay.
of 1828. Then when he began again, David Whitmer and Emma Smith say that he began to use the seer stone that he himself had discovered.
Okay.
All right. So, Julie, I'm going to have you keep a tally. We're going to have a running tally. It's going to be Jeremy versus the church. And question number one is Jeremy accurate when he claims that the plates weren't anywhere in the room and that a stone and a hat was used and that the church has misrepresented for 100 and whatever years the actual process for the translation of the Book of Mormon as verified by Richard Bushman? I think it's 1-0. So, Sandra, you go first.
Well, the whole story is kind of mind-boggling. But Bushman admits, and I think when he gets to the end of the whole thing, that the whole Book of Mormon was done through the seer stone. And so you have two questions. What was the value of the plates, since they're covered on the table or over hid under the fireplace, or maybe even stored outside the house? But what about the God saves these spectacles for what?
Thousands.
1,500 years anyways, that these, and the Mormons, when they show it, a kind of drawing of this, they always draw them as a normal size glasses. But that's not the story. The story is they were big glasses that for a big person. And so Joseph couldn't use them because they were for too big of a head. So the thing, you don't need the plates and you don't need the Urim and Thummim. You don't need either one of those. You could just go out and find a rock in your well and take it home and put it in your hat. And that works better, because Joseph Smith's on record of saying one time, well, he used the stone because it was easier. It didn't hurt his eyes like using those big glasses did. I mean, when you take away the word Urim and Thummim and get rid of the prettier way of phrasing it, that these are just crystal rocks. You either got two rocks set in some sort of big frames that are not usable unless you're just looking in one side or the other. That's not any more of a convincing story than using a rock. And I brought my rock with me.
Show us.
So your daughter comes home one night and says, Dad, I want you to meet my boyfriend. And he's been talking to God, and he let me show you his rock that he puts in his hat and gets revelation. Now, I don't know how many people will be impressed with this, but Mr. Hale did not think this was a selling point, to the point that Joseph and Emma have to elope, and they always downplay this one. But why do they elope? Because the dad can't accept Joseph Smith, the glass looker. He's opposed to his line of work. It's not because he talks to God, it's because he's got a rock and a hat looking for buried treasure. And they can make it all sound so pretty and logical until you stop and think about it. I mean, if your daughter brought home some guy to your house and said, "Hey, Dad, I want to marry this guy. Isn't it wonderful? He has this rock that it tells him all sorts of wonderful things." I mean, it's just, and Richard wants to paint this as some sort of higher technology.
It's a feature, not a bug. It's a feature, Sandra. It's not a bug. Gerardo's losing it.
He talks in this interview about, well, this is some sort of advanced technology.
He does use the word technology.
And it's
Wait
beyond us.
Sandra, you're really awful with spoilers. No, that's fantastic. I love that you brought your own rock. Yeah, like, let's not lose the point. Richard Bushman is brought on to attack Jeremy Runnells, and he has just validated something super important. Gerardo, do you want to add to that?
What I was going to say about the spectacles, why would God preserve these massive things for thousands of years and then have Joseph not use them? But then he can also predict that Joseph is going to lose the 116 pages, and that he's going to have Nephi rewrite everything that his dad wrote and make it more religious in a smaller set of plays. So he can have all that prepared, but he couldn't foresee that the spectacles for 1,000 years were going to be too big for Joseph Smith's head.
Or
I don't know.
Why,
Go ahead, Julia.
or why did Samuel Lawrence, one of his fellow treasure diggers, why could he see the spectacles and Joseph not see them?
Oh, yeah, that story is very interesting. Do you want to tell it?
Dan Vogel writes, the spectacles were suggested
Right.
by Samuel Lawrence about 1825,
Yeah.
and Joseph Smith worked them into the story.
Yeah. Do you remember that story? So they basically, Joseph will take Samuel to the hill, so that because Samuel is known for being a treasure digger too. So then Samuel would validate the story of the plates. And then, they both go into like, "Oh, can you see it? And can you see the plates?" And yeah, I can see the plates. Oh, and then Samuel is the one that says, "Whoa, I see a pair of spectacles with them. Can you see them?"
Crap. Now I gotta change the story.
Yeah, Joseph said, "No, I don't see them." It's like, well, look again. And because as Dan Vogel says, Samuel wants to be the better seer if he wants Joseph to, or if he wants, to validate. To validate Joseph's story.
I think people need to keep in mind that the stories of the Smiths' involvement in the magic and money digging, Joseph's multiple stones, Joseph Smith's appeal to different magical incantations in his treasure digging, and in which is mirrored in how he gets the plates. It's all part of a whole picture of the magic. This is coming from the neighbors. This is all the people that knew Joseph. If we look at the earliest accounts of the people that knew the Smiths, this is the story they tell, which Dan Vogel recorded in his early Mormon documents, where he gives all the statements of the early people associated with the Smiths that show this is the story of early Mormonism. And Bushman knows this. All the church historians know this is the early story. So what do you do with it? You have to some way sugarcoat it to where it doesn't sound ludicrous to the modern mind, that we can accept that this rock is some sort of higher technology. And it's just, I don't care. It's not higher technology.
It's literally the lowest possible form of technology. It's a rock. It's like Earth. You don't get any lower technology than like a rock.
Yeah.
But Bushman is conceding the accounts of all these early people. He just wants to paint it in a fuzzier picture that you don't, when you say Urim and Thummim, you don't think about two magic crystals in some silver setting like eyeglasses or something.
Yeah.
When he talks about seer stone, you don't think about just some rock you found in a well.
Yeah.
And
I mean, like, think about the fact that, first of all, Mesoamericans didn't know how to refine gold back then. But let's just say that we suspend reality and allow Mesoamericans to refine gold to the point of making gold books. And by the way, books weren't a thing back 600 BC. Books didn't exist. So this idea of compiling chapters
Like a Bible.
and into a book, that didn't exist. But anyway, put all that aside. Think about how much they would have had to work to dig out the gold, to refine the gold, to smelt the gold, to hammer out the sheets, and then over generations to scribble on the gold pages and fight and preserve it, so that then when Moroni's on his deathbed and he's wandering around as the last Nephite, he finally buries it in the Hill Cumorah so that 100 and whatever years later, Joseph can dig it up. And so Joseph digs it up and fights off bad guys and protects the plates and, runs through the forest and preserves it. And then he doesn't use it.
Right. So what is that? So that's one of the questions these guys are asking, and that Bushman's talking about. Why did we need the plates?
He didn't respond. He didn't answer his question.
Yeah, you got to have, the reason you have the plates is so that you have some sort of physical object for people to believe your story. Otherwise, you're just talking about some rock that you put in your hand. So what's the evidence? Well, I have these plates. Now, you can't see them, but I got them.
No one can see them.
No one can see them. They're wrapped in this cloth. You can't look at them, because if you look, you're going to die. I mean, this is poor Emma. She's going to move them to dust, but they're covered. And she doesn't dare lift the cover because she'll die if she does, But
doesn't like one of the Whitmer women actually get to?
Yes, a lot of other people can see him in visions, but that's okay.
Emma,
but not
Emma couldn't.
No. What that tells me is that Emma is the shrewdest one in the room.
Ooh.
And so she doesn't get to have these vision experiences.
Oh.
It's just like when you get to polygamy, Emma's the last to know. Why? Because I think Emma's just a little too shrewd. I mean, you remember the story in Nauvoo there where she goes shopping in St. Louis and comes back, and Joseph's had Porter Rockwell set up a bar in the front room for the Nauvoo house. And she comes home and tells Joseph, Joseph, either that bar goes or I do. And if you don't get rid of that, I'm moving the kids across the street. Emma she could stand up to Joseph, and she could see through some of the things that he did. That's why the plates have to be covered, and Emma can't look at them, and she doesn't get a vision.
Was Emma shrewd? Was she shrewd enough to look under the cloth?
Well, you wonder.
She's dusting.
She's
dusting
peeked,
around. She's lifting the plates and dusting, but she doesn't peek. Really?
Well, if you really believe,
If you really believe, yeah.
If you really believe, you wouldn't look.
I mean, Marshall Applewhite had a guy castrate himself because he believed in Heaven's Gate. So, I guess it's possible.
Ooh, yeah, if you really believe.
Yeah.
I mean, these are people that are believing Joseph can find treasure that's buried under the earth. So,
And it isn't just Joseph. Hiram Page has a stone. He's given revelations through. He's one of the witnesses to the Book of Mormon. Mike Quinn says in one of his things, the first 100 converts into Mormonism in the New York area were all out of this magic worldview, magic association, money digging community. So they are easily persuaded. They already believe that you can go out at midnight and have magic circles and incantations to find treasure. How hard would it be to move those people into the realm of believing, instead of ghosts and magic treasures, we have an angel and a set of gold plates, but not to get money from the plates, but it's a divine record from God. So you can see how Joseph moves his story from the magic into the religious realm because he needs a new audience. He needs a new, if you're going to run a scam, he can only get people to believe in his money digging skills so long, because if you don't find a treasure, you got to get a new claim.
Yeah.
So, okay, we're not going to look for buried treasure to get money. We're going to look for buried plates to get a sacred record.
Yeah. And that's why he's later going to have to change the story. He becomes more Christian, or, he has to get rid
More
of the seer
religious,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah. We can.
Julia, did you have something you were going to say? And then I want to show a couple of these slides.
Oh, I can't remember. So maybe
that's
just keep
okay.
going.
So Bushman, so I wrote down some notes. So Bushman, he said there was one, did he say there was one drawing or one painting showing Joseph Smith looking at plates? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because here we've got, I don't know if I misheard him, but here we've got at least 6 different paintings
And
that were used.
That's just what would fit on the slide. I'm sure there's more.
Yeah, so here Julie was able to find at least 6 different artistic renderings of Joseph Smith with the plates in the room, and Oliver Cowdery's there listening. And this is the garbage that we were fed as faithful, devout Mormons for 150 years. And I just don't understand why it doesn't bother Richard Bushman. He just, there's one little painting. Why isn't he outraged at the deception? And why does he never actually criticize church leaders for deceiving us? Now, I know we're going to get to a clip about that.
Yeah.
But so I mean, that's something that I wrote down. Also, he wrote a whole book on the plates. But why would he even care about the plates if they weren't even used in the Book of Mormon? Why write a whole book on plates that were never used to create the thing that the plates are known for? As a Columbia level tenured scholar, it's kind of weird. He's a brilliant man. He's thoughtful. He's sensitive. He's beloved. He has a lot of integrity. He deserves a ton of respect. But that's weird to me, that he actually wrote a book on gold plates when the gold plates were never even used. Sorry, I'm ranting. Julia, I guess I'm caffeinated today. Julia, what did we want to say about this slide?
So I think this is the picture that he was referring to, because this one has been from what I've researched, this has been, at least in like Jeremy Runnells' lifetime or our lifetimes, this is the one that's been the most published. And so I think that's what he's referring to, is this one here with Joseph having his finger on the plates, and Oliver can clearly see them.
I'm pretty sure that that's the photo when we were missionaries that we showed in the,
it's in Preach My Gospel for sure. Yes.
It's in Preach My Gospel. Yeah.
And that's by Del Parson.
It's by Del Parson. Is from Rexburg, Idaho. Did you know?
Oh, nice.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So he's your buddy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go Del.
I think either him or some of his family members either teach and have paintings at BYU Idaho.
Got it. Okay. I just wish Richard Bushman would hold the church leaders accountable for deceiving us, but he never goes there. I mean, Sandra, I think we know why he doesn't criticize the brethren for deceiving us.
Well, because he values his position in the Mormon church.
He values his membership.
You have to be careful what you say.
And he values his status as a celebrated historian who affirms the church's narrative, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and go to the next clip. Is that all right?
There we go.
Yeah.
All right. This is called Dedicating Through Just a Rock.
This seer stone that he uses for the translation process, where did he get the seer stone? Where did he find?
Well, there is evidence of a variety of seer stones. One he found while he was digging a well, and there are others he may have found here and there. I've never been sure if we really have nailed down how many they were and what they looked like, but he found it. It wasn't given him by God. An angel didn't come. He found it and he recognized its properties as they applied to him, and he began to find lost objects with that seer stone.
Are these just normal rocks that he then dedicates to be a seer stone, or are these specifically, according to the historical record, are these like actually special spiritual rocks that he is then able to see things with?
There is no way really to know, but we do have one seer stone remaining, and it's so far as anyone can tell, just a rock.
Right.
All right, Julie, you're laughing. I'll let you go first. Why are you laughing?
I just think it's really funny that it's just a rock. And I think maybe if Dan Vogel's in the comments, I think the church actually has, I think Joseph had 5 seer stones, and I think they still have other ones in their vault. But I just thought it was really funny. He's just like, we don't know how these work, and like, it's
That would
just
be
a
an
rock. I don't
interesting
know, it's just
thing
funny.
to write a book about the stones that actually existed, not the plates that
I think
Didn't
that looks-
exist.
nobody really
The ones
saw.
that didn't exist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sandra, did you have any comments on that one?
Well, it all comes back to the he doesn't know what makes the rocks work. He's not sure if Joseph brings the power to the rock, in which case my rock would work just as good as his. You just had to be a seer, and any rock would do. But it doesn't seem like that in the early accounts. I mean, when he's digging a well, he went through a lot of rocks digging that well. So obviously it wasn't just any rock would do. It was a particular rock.
No, for sure. When you read the accounts, Joseph told everybody it was a magic rock.
Yeah.
With powers.
It was special. Yes, it was special rock.
Which
And
is
isn't
why
he borrowing?
Yeah, he's got to borrow it from Sally Chase so that he can, because it works for him.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and then
Go ahead.
oh, sorry.
Julie. Go ahead.
If it's okay, there's another story that I love telling about Martin Harris where he switches. So I have the 3D,
yes.
I have the
Yeah.
3D version of his rock. So yeah. So Harris switches it out. He puts a different rock in, and Joseph, he puts his face in the hat, and he's like, all is as dark as Egypt. He's like, why isn't this working? And then Martin confesses that he switched the rocks. And so like in Martin's mind, it was like, it's a specific rock. Like you were saying, Sandra, you know, he digs through a bunch of rocks in these wells, but he found this specific one that worked for him. So yeah, anyway, I just like that story.
So it was a magic rock. And Julie, I just want to know, you've got to feel great that every comment you make is mirrored by a comment by Dan Vogel. Because Dan Vogel
That's very
writes,
validating.
Harris's substitute stone didn't work. This is like, somebody wrote that this is like the Avengers Mormon Stories panel. Sandra, were you going to say something?
No.
Okay. Yeah. But do I remember right in the video that Bushman says there's no power in the rock? It's Joseph's power.
Well, it's kind of interesting the way he words it, and he's careful to how he's wording it. I noticed, because he wants to say the rock has power, but he wants to say it applies just to Joseph, because it obviously begs the question: well, why are seers, prophets, and revelators not using it today? So he does try to say, well, this was specially Joseph's gift, but the rock thus had power, and it's just a little bit confusing.
This whole story is so ridiculous when you dig into it. It is so.
But he is
ridiculous.
conceding the whole story of the rock that is just found accidentally is more advantageous, evidently, than using what God preserved for 2,000 years. It doesn't make sense in the worldview of Mormonism that God would preserve both the plates and the medium to translate. That's why he's saving them. These are the way you're going to be able to translate these plates. So you got to have those spectacles in that box since 400 AD. There's those spectacles been in that box for Joseph to use to translate. And then he doesn't need anything in the box.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Dad writes, the stone was either special or Joseph Smith was lying.
Mhm.
And I'm going to add, the church has the stone.
Yes.
So if this stone has special powers, it's either Joseph Smith is lying or the stone has special powers, which means by the church's perspective, the stone has special powers. Why the freak is Russell M. Nelson not using the seer stone today to channel? We could get revelation on transgender people. We could get revelation on gay people. We could get revelation on women. We could get revelation on the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon. He could translate the gold plates. He could translate all sorts of things if he just looked into that magic stone, used his prophet, seer, and revelator powers. Who knows the wonderful things? And instead, we're compounding our assets at Ensign Peak, and that's basically what we're doing, and building temples with large steeples
And fighting little towns so we can
Yeah, like what does a prophet, seer, and revelator do these days, Sandra? And why aren't they using the special stone that has special powers?
Obviously, the brethren know that is not going to help their situation any, or they would be using the rock.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
I also want to say it's really interesting that the host, and I feel a little bit bad about him because he's really trying to get Richard Bushman to spin this a little bit more Mormon sounding. You know, when he uses the word when he asks the question, did Joseph dedicate this stone so he could use it for translation of Book of Mormon? Like, it's trying to use Mormon words, you know, that Mormons are going to be familiar with today, when that's not Joseph's worldview in 1829.
No, he found the magic stone. He didn't do a special although I wouldn't put it past him to do an incantation on the stone, but that's not the story.
I mean,
the
but
story
when
is
he's saying dedication, like,
yeah,
they're thinking, you know, the oil, the
right,
dedication of you know, the temple kind of thing.
So we had one of our sleuther viewers and listeners let us know that the Easton is named Easton Harrell.
Okay.
Oh, good.
So
Okay.
now we know his last name. And I'll just add, somebody made a joke about Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper apparently is like a partner on the CES Letters thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a bona fide professor at BYU. He's of church history and doctrine, StephenCraigHarper.com. And I guess the joke was that it's the first presidency assignment to Stephen Harper is to go after the CES Letter as a BYU professor. So again, it's the church paying its employees to attack critics of the church or honest truth tellers, historians, using their salary, their pension, their benefits to do the church's dirty work through BYU. Does that sound familiar, Sandra?
Yes. Isn't it curious that the church does not have their official explanation of why all these things are lies? I mean, the Mormons want to always say, oh, these stories of the stone and all come out of E.D. Howe's book in 1834, Mormonism Unveiled. And I was always told those are lies. You can't believe any of those neighbors' stories. They all lied. And yet Bushman is conceding the neighbors' stories. He's admitting that when you admit that he uses the stone found in the well, you are admitting to the neighbors' recollections of the Smith family. That's the kind of stories they told.
Yeah.
So why have they told us for years that we can't trust the neighbors' statements in E.D. Howe's book? Bushman sees that they're valid. That is the beginnings of Mormonism.
And Bushman validates Von Brody as well.
Yes.
Really quickly, I'll share another Dan Vogel comment. He says the stone represented Joseph Smith's earliest source of authority. So originally, Joseph didn't claim to have special powers. He claimed to have found a special rock, a magic rock.
So that's interesting.
And that's why he had to use it for the Book of Mormon, because it was the rock that was famous. It was the rock that had the power. And that's why he had to use, people are like, oh my gosh, it's so scandalous that Joseph Smith used the treasure digging stone to translate the Book of Mormon. Well, of course he did. Why? Because it had special powers.
Yeah.
So he had to use it. Let's go ahead and go to the next clip because it talks about the technology.
How come people could see the stone, but not the plates or the Urim and Thummim?
Yeah, if it had special powers, why didn't that strike people dead?
That's interesting.
That's a great point, Gerardo. Because I want to answer that question. I'll let you, viewers and listeners, answer that question. All right, here's the next clip about the technology of these things.
There were some fears that if an unauthorized seer looked into the stone, they would see things that would be disastrous for them.
Sure.
That's just a story. My own feeling is it's his powers using the stone. The stone, who knows the technology of these things? You know, it's just really no point in speculating about it. But the key thing is he received this by the Spirit of God, as he tells us.
Right.
What? Why are we laughing, Gerardo?
Yeah, I mean, what we said earlier, it's calling the stone a technology.
I mean, I don't. Yeah. So like, Richard Bushman is viewed as sacred. Literally, he's sacred to faithful Mormon historians. So to make fun of him or to laugh at him is sacrilegious, and people will hate you for it. But I just have to say, it's weird that I've already made this point to have a Columbia level scholar speculating about magic stones. But it's also weird that he's saying it wasn't the stone that had special powers. He's saying it was Joseph. But if Dan Vogel knows that it was the stone that was thought to have the powers, if Dan Vogel knows that, surely Bushman knows better.
Yeah.
So what is he doing here?
Well, he has to normalize all this story. At the end of the whole thing, Bushman's testimony for the Book of Mormon, his testimony to Joseph Smith's prophetic calling and the Book of Mormon is the Book of Mormon itself, so that the story of how you get it becomes irrelevant. The very fact that Joseph produced a 500-page book is what convinces him that the whole thing's true. But that to me is too easy a path to just dismiss how the book was produced. I mean, a lot of people have written 500-page books. I don't know why the fact of its existence proves anything for Joseph. Joseph tells specifically how the book was produced, how it came to us, how it was translated, and we have to take that seriously. Then if we look at it seriously, the story doesn't make sense.
Yeah. It's kind of silly. It's kind of ridiculous. And it's weird that a scholar of Richard Bushman's stature is entertaining this sort of nonsense.
Yeah. And he's also trying to use kind of like a distraction. Let's not concentrate on the seer stones so much. Let's just think that this was done by the power of God. But is this how God actually acts? I mean, not. And this is, I think, why so many LDS people have a problem when they find out about this, is because this is not the God that they were taught about or that they believed in when they were members of the church. It's not the God that acts through magic or rocks or mysterious ways, and then have the prophet Joseph Smith change his story after. This starts just not making sense with the God that they believe in. So why would we believe that? Why do we need to just take Joseph's word that this was done by the power of God when I think that's why people have a problem with it when they find out about it.
Yeah.
Julia, tell us make any comments you want, but also tell us about this slide that we've got ready with Bushman's quote.
So these are images that were released. I can't remember if it was 2015. I think it was 2015.
It was when this Joseph Smith Papers project came out.
Right. So they released these pictures, and that was the first time I saw them. I was shocked as a member, because I didn't know they had this stone still. But yeah, he says it's just a rock, and so that's why I'm showing these pictures and the little bag that it was kept in. But I imported another clip from Holland because I want to make this other point, and you guys have kind of made it already. But can we just play the Holland clip really quick?
I just want to say something really quick. This story that we mentioned about Martin Harris could sound a little bit faith promoting to some people. It was a special rock. But if you look at the rock, it's a pretty particular rock. And if Joseph has been looking at it for years, it would be pretty easy to identify that Martin Harris had switched it, even though, really hard to find a rock that looks exactly the same. And then, but Martin Harris was, I guess, a little bit too gullible to, and then he believed that Joseph, that the rock had power, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay,
so for those just listening, for those just listening, the rock, if you'll show the pictures again, it's like this, it's stripy. It's almost like a tiger's eye stone. It's like brown and black. It's like, I don't know, it just has stripes on it. So it's very unique. I haven't seen a stone like it before.
Yeah.
Like other than like other tiger's eye. But anyway, so yeah, I think Joseph wouldn't recognize that Martin switched it.
Okay. All right. You want to play the clip? You want me to play the clip, Julia?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if you don't mind. It's just a few seconds.
Modern day, the first presidency and quorum of the 12 are commissioned by God and sustained by you as prophets, seers, and revelators, with the president of the church sustained as the prophet, seer, and revelator, the senior apostle, and as such, the only man authorized to exercise all of the revelatory and administrative keys for the church.
What's your point, Julia?
I don't know why is Nelson not using the stone that they have in their vault? Why, like, one of the things that I pointed out on my TikTok is that the Book of Mormon has been translated in over 100 languages, and there are 7,000 languages in the world. Like, why are they not using the stone to even just promote the Book of Mormon, to just make it available in more languages? Like, these 15 men are called as prophets, seers, and revelators. Seers, like Bushman said that Joseph was like unique, that he was the only one that could use the stone, but like, does that mean Brigham Young couldn't use it? Like, does that mean no one else can use it, even though they're like, why are we calling them as seers? Why are we sustaining them as seers when they don't really do any searing, or, you know, why? I just had that question.
Yeah, Sandra, what was the word that preceded stone? This is a what stone? This is a what stone?
I'm not sure what you're after.
This stone is a what stone? What's the word that comes before it? It's a what stone? What's
magic?
Magic stone? Gerardo?
Seer.
Is it a seer stone?
I'm not sure what you're getting at.
Was this stone known as a seer stone?
No, it was known as, well,
I've heard that term used a lot, seer stone. Is that not how it was used?
Well, I think peepstone is another one that they use too. So I don't know, maybe that's Sandra, what she's thinking.
I guess what I'm asking you is, to Julia's point, what does the term seer mean? If prophecy means to if prophet means to prophesy, if revelator means to provide revelation, what did the early church members think the word seer meant? What Joseph was a seer, what did they think he was able to do?
The seer, yes, that attached to the ability to see in a crystal ball, see in a rock or whatever. The seering. But before the church started, it wouldn't have been a seer stone. I mean, when he's doing magic, it's just a magic rock.
It's a peepstone, right?
It's a peepstone.
Yeah.
And so when you have to make it religious, then you have to have a new name. So now it's going to be a seer stone, which makes it sound like a special God-given instrument that makes it sound more redeemable as a respectable thing to use. Than just a peepstone.
Right. And you know, there are different words. You need to check out the LDS discussions series where we talk all about this. But this was a con. This was a common con. It was called scrying. It was called glass looking. It was called juggling, peeping. It was called peeping, right?
Right. Well, the reason it was illegal was that it was considered like the gypsies having crystal balls going from city to city, and you could pay them to read your future or whatever, looking in the crystal ball. The whole assumption of the legal status was that if you were going around city to city with one of these stones, is that it was a con game. That's why it was illegal. That's why he's called up in 1826 in the charged as Joseph Smith, the glass looker. What's illegal about it is that everyone figured it was a con game. It was a magic trick. It was like crystal ball gazing, that there was no real ability to see the future or to read someone's fortune in the stone. It was some sort of con to get money out of you.
Yeah.
So Joseph's just running around from city to city with a con game that if you pay me so much money, I will walk over your farmland with my stone in my hat and tell you if there's buried treasure. And if you dig at this spot, you dig down 6 feet and you're going to find a treasure. The problem is they never found anything. That's why we know it was a con game, because no treasures are ever found. Yet they've been doing money digging for years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And John, you asked the question, like, why is Russell M. Nelson or Brigham Young and all these people, prophets after Joseph, not looking at the seers and producing revelation like Joseph did? I think that tells us a little bit more about whether it is the actual power of God that they supposedly have to lead the church and receive revelation versus, this is a special gift that Joseph Smith had, a special talent that he had to be able to produce words that sounded like God or the King James Bible. And it's evident, right, that this is because we don't see Russell M. Nelson doing it today. It is evident that it's something that was special to Joseph, this ability to produce words that sounded Bible-like, revelation-like, and make people believe that it was coming from God. And Russell M. Nelson doesn't do it because he doesn't have the talent to do it. So it tells you that it's not the power that he has that he inherited from Joseph. It was, when people ask, well, how can like a person like Joseph do that? Well, Joseph was a special person, and he was, just like Beethoven or like Shakespeare. You make your peak on someone that has done something important in history. Joseph Smith had his special talent, and his special talent was producing words that sounded like God and make people believe that it was coming from God.
Yeah, I believe that Joseph Smith's special power was being able to convince people that he had special powers.
Yeah.
and if you just think about it, I love that we're distilling this. He starts out as a scryer, a peeper, a charlatan with a peepstone. And then when he gets religion, he graduates to a seer with the seer stone. And then he adds prophet and revelator later. And by the end, he's as great as Jesus, pretty much, right? I mean, he's next to Jesus.
And the reason that he makes the shift is in 1826, he's hauled into court for running a scam at Joseph Smith, the glass looker. And the whole point was this a con game of telling Stoll where to find buried treasure? So he testifies that he doesn't do it much anymore because it hurts his eyes and staring at that stone all the time in the hat. And then his benefactor that hired him testifies in his behalf. Oh, I know Joseph really had this power because he told us if we dug at this one space, we'd dig down and would find a feather, and past that would find the treasure. And we dug down and we found the feather. So we know he was of God. This was really true. But then we hit the hard place and the treasure slipped away. So there's no treasure found. So at this point, Joseph's got to plead to the judge, I have real power, but I quit doing it anymore because it hurts my eyes, because he has to convince the judge that he is not running a con. So but he never finds the treasure. So he's got to come up with a new game. So what we're going to go look for new treasures now. It's going to be the word of God. Instead of selling the gold plates for money, we're going to translate them into a new book of scripture.
And for me, the biggest condemnation of this whole story is that the church hid it from us for 150 years.
Yeah.
If this weren't a problematic story, why didn't they just tell us it?
Well, not
from
just the
start?
church. Richard Bushman is going to tell us who hid it first.
Yeah. Okay, really quickly, I just want to read one comment. Stephen Robbins, he writes, deconstructed my faith in the BYU library circa 2004. The attack on the CES letter reminds me of No Ma'am, That's Not History, which was Hugh Nibley's attack on Fawn Brody. I never read it, but for a while, its very existence was comforting enough to stick around, but that didn't last too long. Julia, did you want to say anything else about this next slide?
No, I think I made the point too, that we have 15 prophets, seers, and revelators. Why are they not using this?
Using the seer stone, especially it's are there enough problems in the world where a magic seer stone could come in handy? Sandra, what do you think?
Well, I could think of quite a few things they could solve with that.
COVID, they could have prevented COVID.
Yeah,
there's like
all those missionaries that were stranded on countries because they couldn't get out.
There's 10 missionaries who have, I think 9 missionaries have already died this year in service. Maybe that seer stone could have been used to prevent missionaries' death. Maybe.
Yeah. So it just boggles the mind when you think that if you truly had a gift of a divine instrument that had such advanced technology that you could solve all the questions of the ages, that you would just lock it away in the back of the vault.
One wonders why Joseph didn't use the seer stone to find the 116 pages.
Yes. Very good.
To sum it all up, Dan Vogel writes, Mormon leaders have no stones. Okay. But a bump. Thank you, Dan Vogel. All right. So let's go ahead and go to the next clip. And the clip is entitled, It's Not Widely Told. It Wasn't Part of the Story. And I just, by the count, is it Richard Bushman declaring Jeremy Runnells 2-0 or 3-0? I'm already losing count.
Well, I think we're up to 3.
Is it 3-0, Julia?
I think
right.
so.
Richard Bushman declares Jeremy Runnells 3, Mormon Church 0. All right, let's go to the next clip.
Throughout the CES letter, the author, he talks about how he was raised kind of thinking what you said, how he had the plates right here, he'd write it down right here, or he just read directly from the plates to whoever the scribe was at any given time. And he then shares how he felt so betrayed by the time he realized, oh, he probably was looking into a seer stone and a hat.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about how he felt as if he was gaslit and how he feels he was lied to throughout his entire life, how it caused all of this cognitive dissonance for him because it was so different than what he taught. He then explains how he felt kind of hurt because so many scholars are like, well, this has always been here. You could have studied it. But he then cites some BYU articles written by prominent professors as they share how it wasn't in the seer stone, how they believed it was just the Urim and Thummim. So there's all of this contradictory research out there, and the author feels so betrayed and hurt because he's like, how could I have known these things?
That's very important because a lot of people feel they were lied to and feel betrayed. So far as I can recover the story, it was known that he had a seer stone. B.H. Roberts spoke about it. John Widtsoe spoke about it in the 1920s. So I was aware of a seer stone, partly because, I poke around in these things. So the knowledge was there, but it was not widely told. It wasn't in manuals. It wasn't part of the story of the gold plates that was told in Sunday school. So it was just the standard view was some simplified version of the seer stone, of the Urim and Thummim, and the translation coming.
All right. So he's basically saying they knew.
Yeah.
I think that's 4-0 because it's Bushman agreeing with Jeremy Runnells that people deserve to feel that he knows a lot of people, not just Jeremy, feel betrayed, which means he's validating Jeremy's feelings of betrayal. But he's also saying leaders as early as B.H. Roberts, who was living in the late 1800s, early 1900s, right?
Yeah.
He mentions Widtsoe as well.
And that becomes problematic. And Julia has a couple slides.
Right.
About, he tries to be a little sneaky, I think, with Widtsoe. But
Let's let Sandra answer, and then we'll go to the slides.
Well, this whole problem that covers the 1900s is Joseph Fielding Smith.
right.
Joseph Fielding Smith, as an apostle, becomes church historian, and he's the custodian, the keeper of the gate that keeps the story of the stone and the hat and all of the magic and those things out of the manuals. He's making sure it doesn't come through to anyone. Bushman in this interview talks about, the people that talked to Jeremy, they weren't lying to him. They just didn't know. No one knew. Well, the reason they didn't know was because Joseph Fielding Smith had made sure no one knew. He knew about it. And like Bushman says, the church historians knew. Everyone was put on notice in 1945 when Fawn Brodie brings out her book. No one has an excuse after 1945 for not knowing or telling the right story. She brought it out then. But how come no one else knew about it? Because just like what my grandma said, they stood up in Relief Society and told all the women, don't go down to the bookstore and get that apostate book. No man knows my history because it's full of lies.
Yeah.
Of course, my grandma went down and bought it, and
And here you are.
and here I am. But Joseph Fielding Smith is the one that really put the kibosh on the knowledge going out into the manuals. But Brodie blew the lid off of that and made the church face that this is a problem. And that's when you get Hugh Nipley and the different modern apologists coming up, because ever since Brodie, they've been trying to downplay all of these problems.
Yeah. All right, Julia. So I do think we have a couple slides. This one's okay to show, right? Apostle Widtsoe.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So
talk us through these, Julia.
So hang on. So Bushman, in his clip just now, and maybe I don't have the source, but he said in the 20s, Apostle John A. Widtsoe knew about the stone. So if he published it in the 20s, I don't have that source. So if somebody else has it, please drop it in the comments. But the ones that I did find were from the right after Fawn Brodie wrote her book or published her book.
Wow.
So these might be reactionary. I know the other one, the second
this is
slide.
a year after knows my history.
That's what she
Exactly.
said. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And so what he says here, so, Richard Bushman uses him as he knew about that. But let me read you the quote.
So this is from the Improvement era, right?
Right. From 1946. Yes.
Yeah.
So he says, Joseph Smith was not a money digger, nor did he deceive people with peepstone claims. It is almost beyond belief that writers who value their reputations would reproduce these silly and untrue charges. It suggests that they may set out to destroy Mormonism rather than to detail true history.
I mean, I don't like that quote because it makes it seem like was Widtsoe lying, or did Widtsoe just not believe the treasure digging stuff?
It's hard to know how much is.
The thing is, they knew it. They have
they
it. They
knew that was the story. Yes, I think they are just being deceptive.
I mean, we know that Joseph Fielding Smith, when he found the 1832 account of Joseph Smith's first vision, which contradicted the official account, we know Joseph Fielding Smith did what?
He cut it out of the book to take that account out of circulation.
To hide it, right?
To hide it from other historians.
So we know that it's not beyond Mormon apostles to outright deceive people, correct?
Right, absolutely.
I mean, we also covered in the Second Class Saints book, Black Mormons and the Struggle for Equality, that they knew about Elijah Abel,
yes,
that Joseph Smith gave priesthood, or that Black men were allowed to receive the priesthood during Joseph Smith's time. They intentionally withheld that from the Way to Perfection, Joseph Fielding Smith's book, and subsequent books, because it was an inconvenient truth.
Not only leaving it out, but then coming up with super stupid explanations.
Did you know that Matt Harris has come up with that Joseph Fielding Smith would tell people there were two Elijah Abels, a white one and a black one?
Oh, that's convenient.
That's actually literally in the book, or that it was a mistake that Joseph made. But we know that the church leaders can and have deceived people.
Absolutely.
But it's hard to know whether Widtsoe's doing that here. Go ahead, Julie. I didn't mean it to steal your thunder.
Oh no, I can't remember what I was going to say. We can go to the next one.
Well, if we take Richard Bushman's word for him saying that Widtsoe did know about the peepstone in the 1820s, that means that 20 years later someone changed his mind about it and decided to campaign against it.
Yeah.
And if he knew about it, why were they hiding it?
Right.
If he knew, that's another thing.
Right.
All right, next slide, Julia. What about this one?
So the source that I pulled this from said that this book was published in response to Fawn Brodie's No Man Knows My History. I don't know. I can't verify that. But
it makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yes, and it takes a while to publish a book and to gather all this stuff. But this was published in 1951, and he says again, he says enemies have suggested and widely circulated the suggestion that Stowell employed Joseph because he was said to have a peepstone by which lost treasure could be located. The suggestion is, of course, based upon his claim of having had communications with heavenly beings. In fact, shortly after the church was organized, Hiram Page, who claimed to have a stone by which revelations from the Lord could be obtained, was sternly rebuked by the prophet. And so here he's saying to me that, he seems to be suggesting that Joseph didn't have one. They're like, they're getting it confused because he's talking to God. And that's why, people can communicate through God, I guess, through seer stones. But then like he brings up Hiram Page and he says he was sternly rebuked. Never in here does he seem to suggest, if I'm reading it correctly, that Joseph validated or used a seer stone.
Right.
Or like the use of one.
Right.
Yeah, and the funny thing there is we have Joseph Smith's own mother in her history telling about that Stoll came up from Pennsylvania up to the Smith's home specifically to hire Joseph Smith because he had heard of his ability to use a stone in his hat to find buried treasure. Stoll came up across the state specifically because of hearing of Joseph Smith's power. And so this whole idea that it's the enemies of the church that got up these stories, it was the normal story to Joseph's family. His mother sees no problem with this, to say that, she's proud of this. Stoll had heard her son has these wonderful powers and came up to hire him to go down there and look for that silver mine.
Yeah. You have to remember there's a lot of this, the historical sources that we have about the use of the seer stone for the translation of the Book of Mormon are the same sources that they are using to quote faithful, to grab faithful quotes, like for example, the same source where Emma tells the story about Joseph translating day after day, and like the story about Joseph not knowing that there was a wall in Jerusalem and that kind of stuff. It's the same source where Emma would have told the story about the seer stone and the hat. So they had to had known that was there, but they intentionally were leaving it out.
Right.
Well, and all of those historians knew about David Whitmer's pamphlet. They all want to use David Whitmer's dying testimony in 1887 that he believed and was faithful to believe the Book of Mormon, even though he left the church. Here's his dying testimony, the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon. But they don't tell you that the rest of the book is a validation of Joseph Smith's seer stone. Whitmer's fully invested in that whole story, and he believes that that's the way the Book of Mormon's translated, through the stone and the hat. It's amazing how they want to pick and choose, and then they want to get after those of us that are shocked, dismayed, and disappointed when we read about this. Well, you should have known all along. How would we have known all along?
Yeah, I think that's behind the host of this podcast question. He's kind of doubting that Jeremy really felt betrayed.
Yeah.
He's doubting that church leaders deceived Jeremy Runnells and the rest of us, and that Jeremy feels genuinely betrayed. And that's when I get so angry and I go at Jacob Hess and I go at Maureen Proctor and apologists, it's because like they don't acknowledge the legitimate pain, not just of like 5 people or 3 people or a dozen people. Over hundreds of thousands of people have left the Mormon church now over the church's deceptions around history. Clearly, it's a valid, reasonable feeling that even Richard Bushman himself acknowledges. And I just wish the apologists could please just give us the respect of validating that it's reasonable that we felt deceived. And if that weren't enough evidence, Julia, why don't you read us from the king himself, Joseph Fielding Smith, Doctrines of Salvation.
Right. So Joseph Fielding Smith was the church historian, just to make that clear. He would know what these documents say. But he says in his book, while the statement has been made by some writers that the prophet Joseph Smith used a seer stone part of the time in his translating of the record, and information points to the fact that he did have in his possession such a stone, yet there is no authentic statement in the history of the church which states that the use of such a stone was made in that translation. The information is all hearsay. And personally, I do not believe that this stone was used for this purpose. The stones, the Urim and Thummim, which were given to the brother of Jared, were preserved for this very purpose of translating the record. Both of the Jaredites and the Nephites, it hardly seems reasonable to suppose that the prophet would substitute something evidently inferior under these circumstances.
I mean, we now have 2 choices. Either they're intentionally lying to us and deceiving us, or they're clueless and they're incompetent. And by the way, you know what's one way that they could find out whether Joseph Smith used a seer stone? They could grab their seer stone and then look into it and ask the seer stone, which they had in the vaults. Am I wrong, Sandra?
That's right. They've got it.
They probably were trying, and that was it's not working, and that's why they're trying so hard to deny that it was the real story.
Yeah, like freaking use your seer stone, but they're either incompetent or deceptive. I don't know if there's a third option.
No, and that's clear in that statement of Joseph Fielding Smith. He knows what the history is. He knows that the seer stone was the main use of translating the plates, not the Urim and Thummim, the supposed eyeglasses saved with the plates. He knows all of those things. He's read all of the same stuff we've read now of the statements by the early witnesses. Whitmer, Harris, Emma Smith, everyone that's in the room where it happened describes using a seer stone. They are not talking about him putting on spectacles.
Yeah. And prophets, seers, and revelators who talk to God and are special witnesses of Christ. Yeah, that if you're going to claim that power and authority and you're going to claim that direct communication, I heard recently that one of the apostles is going around saying he's seen the face of Christ and he's heard the voice of Christ. If you're going to make those bold claims, yeah, we're going to expect you to get your story straight about your founding prophet and the most sacred, correct book that's ever been written on the earth. More correct than the Bible, by the way, right, Sandra?
That's right.
Yeah. You got to get your story straight. Okay. All right. The next clip is around the brethren and their need to be educated by us and by Richard Bushman. So let's go ahead and play that clip.
In this person's view of things is to feel he was betrayed. That implies that the general authorities all knew the truth, and then they hid it from other people. They didn't all know the truth. They were taught the same thing that your friend was. It was just standard belief. And the other things, partly because Mormons were a little embarrassed by them, the seer stone didn't seem quite right for a prophet of God, were just sort of kept in the background. So it was just a standard view of how the translation worked. And the whole church had to be educated, including the general authorities.
So now I'm confused. Did Joseph Fielding Smith and Widtsoe and B.H. Roberts, did they know? Or did they not know and they had to be educated? I'm super confused.
Well, they're the ones that knew, and they're the ones that covered it up and made the narrative the one we all grew up on that said he didn't use the stone in the hat. And that's why all of us peons downriver from those guys had to get re-educated. But that's the whole point Jeremy's making, is why do we all have to get re-educated? The church leaders were the people we looked to tell us the truth. And obviously, there was some point along the way when they quit telling the truth and developed a narrative that everyone realized didn't match the actual occurrences. So now we have to tell it straight. And so Bushman talks about, well, maybe you have the clip there, when he talks about like from 1990 onward, they had to get out the right story. Well, Alicia's speechless. They knew the right story from day one. Joseph Smith started the process of camouflaging what really is going on. He's the one that originally starts taking out of the records the use of magic and stones and these types of things early on in his history. When he writes his 1838 account of the history, he's already downplaying the magic elements of the origin of his story. They're changing the Doctrine and Covenants to take out Oliver's magic working with the rod of nature, this witch hazel stick that's supposed to point you to minerals or water or gold or whatever. The whole early church in New York was steeped in these magical practices, and the church gradually, deliberately starts eliminating those things from the telling of its history. And Joseph Fielding Smith is the main one in our day, in my day, that promoted that false narrative, but now it's caught up with them.
Yeah.
Because of photography, because of professional researchers getting in and finally getting to see things in all the records. We know the real story. So now they've got to re-educate. But the re-education means getting us to accept a very unusual story as being normal. It isn't normal to think of someone using a rock and a hat to get a translation. So there is all this smoke and mirrors to make it seem like this rock is high technology.
Yeah.
This isn't technologically valid.
And why is it, what happened to Fawn Brody? What was her ultimate fate?
She got excommunicated for writing her book.
And what happened to you and Gerald?
Well, Gerald and I asked for our names to be taken off the rolls.
What would have happened?
What would have got thrown out if we hadn't have asked?
And what happened to me for doing Mormon Stories?
You got thrown out.
And what happened to Jeremy Runnells?
You got thrown out. Everyone gets thrown out that tries to.
And what happened to
bring
Brett?
it
What
forward.
happened to Brett Metcalf, who was talking about the Book of Mormon?
Yeah, he got thrown out.
Okay, so and what happened to Grant Palmer, by the way?
He got thrown out.
Okay, so what we've got here is the brethren. Think about what it means that these, special witnesses of Jesus Christ, prophets, seers, and revelators talk to God and Jesus. I just listed 8 historians who at one point were faithful members, and all they were trying to do is to just kind of like, hey, brethren, hey, listen, guys, you've been telling a story that isn't quite right. So we're going to make this huge sacrifice and make our parents mad and our grandparents mad and lose all our friends and family. But we're going to go ahead and do a really courageous thing and just kind of help you know the truth, because you've been misleading people for a long, long time. And we know you don't want to lie. And we know you don't want to deceive people and mislead people. So let us sacrifice our whole lives to help you. And then what do?
Throw you out.
They guillotine them.
Yeah.
They spiritually assassinate them. What does that say about these people? What does it say about their character? What does it say about their integrity, their humility, their openness to learning, their hubris, their pride? What does it say? Julia, were you trying to say something?
Oh, no, you're good. Keep going.
Sorry, I'm monologuing. Okay, really quickly, a couple super chats we have to share. Spaniel 53 writes, "Love Sandra and everyone in the Mormon Stories team. Thanks for all you do to generate this extremely important content." Sandra, they love you. How does it feel to be so loved?
Well, I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So thanks, Spaniel, for that super chat. Rebecca Raven writes, "So wonderful to see Sandra. These dives into history are my favorite type of content." Thank you, Rebecca Raven, for that super chat. Richard Burton writes, "Bushman says that his goal is to reveal Smith as he saw himself, quote, to recover the world of a prophet." That's the Rough Stone Rolling preface. "This would be like writing a biography of L. Ron Hubbard that has a working assumption that Xenu is actually real. So stupid." And again, we're laughing at the sacred cow of Mormon historians. We don't we all love and respect Richard Bushman on some level?
Yes, he's a very nice guy.
But he also has probably done more than almost anyone to push the brethren to tell a more truthful history. Would you say he was more successful than you, Sandra, in getting the brethren to own up to their truthful history?
Well, yes, his Rough Stone Rolling is a monumental book, and it is the most frank telling of Mormon history that I think the Mormon historians have been able to do so far. And I commend him for that, but it's not quite to the point of full disclosure. It still is sugarcoating the real history of Mormonism.
And the implications of it, right?
Yes, the implications.
And he stands on the corpse, the spiritual corpse of Fawn Brody. He stands on the corpses of Gerald and you. Yeah. He has privilege in being able to now tell the truth, because really what happened is people like you, Sandra, and Gerald, they, along with the internet and Jeremy and others, to propel your work forward.
Yeah.
that basically beat the brethren into submission to the point where Richard Bushman would then be forced to publish a book like Rough Stone Rolling, because the brethren were literally on their knees begging for mercy because the truth was destroying them.
Yeah.
Is that not right?
If I would have had Rough Stone Rolling at the time that I was doing my quest, my talks with my bishop would have been a lot easier. Because no one was conceding the things that he's conceding in his book.
Yeah. And to his credit, he says Fawn Brodie was a great historian.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he deserves a lot of respect. And so
He did bring the story forward. I believe he's helped a lot in bringing the Mormons forward into a more reliable telling of the story.
Yeah.
But I think it's a first step. It's not the end goal.
Yeah. And he's doing great, right? But then also, how many Mormons know about Bushman or Rough Stone Rolling?
Oh, like less than 1%.
And like my sister, when she was on her mission president wouldn't let her read Rough Stone Rolling when she had questions, and so yeah, I mean, he's done great, but it's still, we're not close to where this disclosure should be, right?
Here's a great comment. Does Sandra Tanner have a website?
Oh, yes, utlm.org.
No, I don't know if Daniel John Carey knows who you are and what Utah Lighthouse Ministry has been. We're looking at a legend here. You probably know that. But how many books have you guys published over the years?
I don't even know. We've written dozens of books on Mormon history, which we've put all up free on our website.
Woohoo.
You can print them off. I mean,
PDFs, right?
PDFs.
Yeah.
Mormonism Shadow Reality is on our website for free. Anyone can print their own copy off. Takes a ream of paper. Well, more than a ream of paper. You'll have to have about 600 and something pieces of paper to print it off, but you could do this.
and they ask if you could recommend one or two books. I guess Mormonism, Shadow and Reality.
Right. And I think that Joseph Smith's plagiarism of the Bible in the Book of Mormon is one of his Gerald's top research projects beyond the Mormonism book. And then our book on Mormonism, Magic, and Masonry, where we go into all this money digging kind of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff on our website that go into these topics we're talking about.
We'll have Julia put these links in the show notes where you can get at mormonstories.org. We'll include links there. Really quickly, Dale Holly writes, "You are all awesome. Thank you for your content. You are saving everyone's mental health." Thank you, Dale. And then Exmo Shirts is in the house, and they say, "I love Gerardo's shirt." Gerardo, show us. We can't see it. Lift it up.
You can put it on the big screen.
Oh, we'll show the big screen.
Yeah,
what does it say, Gerardo?
Thanks to church.
And you got that from Exmo Shirts? Is
Yes.
that right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Exmo Shirts. Exmo Shirts says, "We love Mormon Stories podcast." We love you too, Exmo Shirts. Okay. All right. I'm kind of ranty a little bit today. So, Julia, did you want to talk to us about this quote from George Q. Cannon?
Yeah, so really quick, let me just preface this just to remind, because like in the clip he said that, the brethren even needed to be educated on the seer stone because they didn't know about it. And so Jeremy shouldn't be surprised that he didn't know about it. So, but what I have here is that I have 4 slides. So the seer stone really wasn't talked about very much in the church's history. But I have 4 slides of apostles talking about it and admitting that it was there, and including the current prophet right now. But this one's from George Q. Cannon, and it was published in his book in 1888, and the book is called Life of Joseph Smith. And so he says in it, Cannon writes about Joseph Smith's use of the seer stone, calling it a peculiar pebble or rock. And then he tells the story of Martin Harris slyly substituting another rock resembling the seer stone for the prophet's real medium of translation. And so like they know he's aware of it. He knows about it. This is an apostle of the Lord. And if you go to the next slide.
Okay.
So we have Lorenzo Snow. In September of 1898, he was called as the new prophet of the church. And one early member named Frederick Kensley wrote in his diary about an experience he had with President Snow. And this is what he writes. He says, "I called on President Lorenzo Snow, who I found in his office alone. He was feeling, I think it should be unwell, or well, I can't remember. He was feeling well. He had an extremely interesting. We had an extremely interesting interview. He showed me the seer stone that the prophet Joseph Smith had, by which he had done some of the translating of the book. So like so even Lorenzo Snow, the new prophet, he has the stone and he's showing it off. Like I think that's really like the brethren need to be educated. And so you go to the next one, and this is Russell M. Nelson, and this is published in the Ensign in July of 1993. He says Joseph Smith would put the seer stone in a hat and put his face in the hat, drawing it closely around his face to exclude the light. And in the darkness, the spiritual light would shine. And this is super interesting. A piece of something resembling parchment would appear on the stone, and on it appeared the writing. One character at a time would appear, and under it was the interpretation in English. It was written down and repeated to Brother Joseph to see if it was correct. Then it would disappear, and another character with the interpretation would appear. And for those just listening, there's a little black and white image here of Joseph and Oliver. There's a sheet between them, and Joseph's looking over the plates with his fingers on his forehead like he's really concentrating. But like, even though, so I don't know why they did this, but the artwork.
Well, that's a quote from, is it Martin Harris?
Martin Harris.
I mean, is that the Tiffany Monthly article?
It's Ensign, the July 1993
but
Ensign.
what Russell M. Nelson is referring there, he's quoting Martin Harris.
Yeah, right. People need to realize, that's not Nelson saying that.
Right,
He's
you're
quoting
very right.
Martin Harris.
But he knew in 1993. I mean, that's the
But
year I graduated.
yes, he knew about Martin Harris' statement.
That's not just the year I graduated from BYU. It's the year the church excommunicated the September 6th, again, for telling factual history.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Julia.
I just wanted to point out that, like, in that, if you'll show that slide again, I just think it's interesting that even alongside this story published in the Ensign of using the stone in a hat, that's not what the artwork reflects. It reflects.
So in the article where Russell M. Nelson is quoting Martin Harris about the seer stone on the hat, they have an artwork. In that same article, there's a picture of Joseph Smith looking at the plates directly. No, there's no picture of.
So he's not using the seer stone that Nelson is acknowledging he used.
Right.
Well, and that never happened. He never looked at Richard Bushman already told us he never looked at the plates.
Not while Oliver was translating.
Right. Or Martin Harris.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then if you go to the next one, it reflects the same thing. This one's from Apostle Neil A. Maxwell, and he says Martin Harris related of the seer stones. Sentences would appear and were read by the prophet and written by Martin. So he's also talking about the seer stone. But in the image reflected in this Ensign from 1997, it doesn't show that. So I just think that's interesting that the church, like I know later we'll even talk about how the church wants to throw these artists under the bus, but like the church can also commission artists to do things. Hey, this is an article where they mention the seer stone. Can you do some artwork about this that reflects the story? And that doesn't happen. We don't see that happening at all.
Yeah.
And what's this next slide? This is a cool. This slide's pretty cool.
Right. So So these are manuals that I have personally. These are ones that I grew up with, that I had around me. And I'm sure Jeremy Runnells had similar things.
Read some of them for the listeners.
So the gospel principles, Preach My Gospel, which I had as a missionary, the Book of Mormon. So I went to BYU, Idaho, and we took Book of Mormon classes. So that's what in the corner is. And then you have there's several of them, the Doctrine and Covenants student manual, the restoration pamphlet that you give as a missionary, the newer gospel principles, the Book of Mormon
heritage,
our heritage,
history,
the Book of Mormon stories,
Mormon
so
doctrine,
things that are being published now, and these are all specifically published by the church. Like they have the church's little logo on it. But if you go to the next slide, that's how. This is how many were published about the stone in the hat.
Zero.
Zero. All of them have little X's on them because none of them reflect the story. So I'm not surprised that Jeremy Runnells feels, and I felt, and I'm sure many others felt, that they were betrayed, that they were gaslit, that they were lied to, because nowhere would he have been exposed to this. Like Richard Bushman says, oh yeah, it was out there, and it was, but you have to and as he says, he went digging for it, or he went poking around for it. Jeremy doesn't think to go poking around because he doesn't even know that's a thing. So I just don't.
So are we, but this is something that apologists say. They'll say, well, it was in the Ensign at least twice. So Jeremy should have known. Sandra, Gerardo, you should have known. John, you should have known. It was in the Ensign twice.
I was looking at the picture right next to it, to the little quote.
So Sandra, what's the response? We Bushman's saying multiple things, and we're actually saying multiple things. On the one hand, we're saying they hid it from us, they deceived us, they lied to us. On the other hand, we're acknowledging that it was in the Ensign at least twice.
Well, that twice hardly counters the hundreds of times in their articles they all said the opposite thing.
They denied it.
and in the missionary lessons and in church curriculum, because
Well,
nowhere.
not only the omissions, right? Because those manuals are the omissions where it's not mentioned.
Yeah.
But then how many quotes are there where they're denying that it was ever used, like Joseph Fielding Smith or the other quotes that we showed, you know?
Yeah. And,
Right,
and
when I
teaching us
was
the wrong
having-
narrative. Yeah.
Right. When I was having my questions and I talked to my bishop and this guy's brought in to answer all my questions, their big answer was Joseph Fielding Smith, Doctrines of Salvation. We just saw where Joseph Fielding Smith absolutely lied
Yeah.
about the whole story of the stone and plates thing. So, of course, you end up feeling like you've been gaslighted and lied to. The sources I had around me all were opposite of what you actually find Bushman conceding today.
Yeah.
It's that the public narrative has changed.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, I think we mentioned Doctrines of Salvation, volumes 1,
Yeah.
2, and through here on Mormon Stories. And we always talk about Mormon doctrine. On my mission, you couldn't go to the church, supply office, the area office in Guatemala and buy Mormon doctrine, but you absolutely could buy Doctrines of Salvation 1, 2, and 3, not just in English, but it was available in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
I read Doctrines of Salvation multiple times, all 3 volumes on my mission in Spanish. So in some ways it was more influential on me than Mormon doctrine was.
Yeah.
Right.
Right?
Yeah,
Yes.
for sure.
Julia, what's
It's also super
Gerardo,
quoted a lot on manuals. and also-
Yeah. That's the big thing is these little ensign articles that if you didn't happen to read that one page on these magazines with literally 150 pages that's published monthly over multiple decades. And by the way, we were all kind of kids or teens at that point. How could we pay attention to that when we're being inundated and flooded with the official curriculum at seminary, at institute, in Sunday school, in general conference, with the false narrative involving the plates and the Urim and Thummim?
Right.
So Julia, tell us about this next slide.
So on the KUTV in 2015, they published the first time that the church showed images of Joseph Smith's seer stone. So that was big. They said it was an ongoing effort to demystify some of the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, the history. And so they say that this is the first time officials just released this. So like this is the first time they're showing the seer stone is in 2015. And Jeremy Runnells, he published the CES letter in 2013. So like even after he publishes it, they're still not showing it. They're not being transparent or open that the fact that they have it.
And you won't find these pictures in any of the manuals from the church to even today. This is on the Joseph Smith Papers project that you have to pay, like $90. I think it's for each book. And there's
so
like,
expensive.
like, I don't know how many, like 20 of them. And you have to find the right page to find the picture, Yeah.
2015 is ridiculously late.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
There's Fawn Brody. There's all of Sandra's decades of work. There's again, Grant Palmer, like so many decades where the church could have come clean about this. And it literally took the internet and websites like Mormon Think, podcasts like Mormon Stories, and of course, Jeremy Runnells' CES letter that finally beat the brethren into submission to acknowledging the seer stone in the hat in 2015. Think about that. And that's the same year I was excommunicated.
And I think one of the big reasons that you have the church finally coming to talk about the magic and the stone and all of this is Mark Hoffman. We owe him a great deal of thanks because of his documents that he made up about magic. It forced the church to try to do an apologetic of why salamanders were all right. So you had all the BYU guys telling us this was a wonderful example of angels and everything, and salamanders were a beautiful picture of this. And then we find out Hoffman's documents are forgeries. But it launched the church into talking about magic because of Mark's documents. First, because the church was trying to spin on why his documents weren't damaging, and then trying to explain why they were buying them when they were forgeries. But ever since then, you've seen the church dealing more with the magic worldview of early Mormonism. So I think we seeing the fruit of Mark Hoffman's efforts to make the church face its original history.
A few other things that also deserve credit. I agree, Sandra. I think Leonard Arrington deserves credit. The church administration, the history department that he ran for 10 years,
Right.
Dialogue, Journal of Mormon Thought, the Journal of Mormon History, Sunstone. I think they all play an important role.
Yes.
I also think the sort of Hans Matson Swedish rescue, and then the intervention that, Travis Stratford and me and Greg Prince, along with Hans Matson, where we interviewed with Marlon Jensen, to sort of, where we did a study of 3,000 ex-Mormons to try and understand why so many people were leaving the church. Seer Stone in the Hat was one of the top 3 reasons, if I remember it. We bring that to the church in 2012, 2013, 2014 timeframe. And that's when the brethren knew that number one, they were losing their best and brightest, which means tithe payers. And then secondly, the church knew that they felt betrayed. And it was that study that came out of Hans Matson and the Swedish Rescue that let Marlon Jensen argue to church leaders that they needed to come clean in 2015. All right. So what's this next slide, Julia?
This is just the Salt Lake Tribune. Also, this is in August of 2015. They're also publishing about it. And then I think if you go to the next slide, I think in efforts to try to answer questions about why we haven't seen these before, this slide talks about how, I don't know if your little side panel, John, is showing.
Oh yeah, John, you're showing your text.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I'll go ahead. Keep going.
Okay. I'll just read it. Okay. So it says, over the years, artists have sought to portray the Book of Mormon translation, showing the participants in many settings and poses with different material objects. Each artist's interpretation is based upon its artist's own views, research, and imagination, sometimes aided by input and direction from others. And so to me, they're sort of throwing artists under the bus. And one thing I was thinking of is in Matt Harris's book, he talks about, and I think Gerardo, you've even mentioned this too, where the church is very specific about what they want to show. They don't want to show interracial couples. They'll even substitute out couples. If they are mixed race, they'll switch one out to take the pictures. So they're very specific in what they show. And I think the reason we have not seen, or we did not see the seer stone, is because the church didn't want to show the seer stone. The church didn't want it to be out until 2015. I think, John, with what you were saying is they're pushed so much that they're like, we have to show this.
Yeah. And people are asking what that photo is. It's basically Russell and Nelson in a bus.
Richard Turley.
Oh, Richard Turley, the assistant church historian.
Yeah, because he's the one that wrote that wrote that statement.
What a great picture.
Oh, okay. So he takes over for Marlon Jensen as church historian. He's an attorney, by the way, not a historian. And it shows him driving a bus. Is that like a hole in the windshield where the rock has been thrown through it? And then it's got an artist on the ground drawing a false depiction of the church's of Joseph Smith's translation process, and he's about to get run over by Richard Turley. That's a great. I'd never seen that before.
Photo.
That's a great. Who found that?
I made it.
Did you make that? Did you really?
It was a mix of AI and Photoshop.
Oh my gosh, Gerardo, we've got to share that photo far and wide. That's brilliant. All right, and Richard Turley's a super nice guy, by the way. I don't mean to. Anyway, we're having way too much fun. Let's go ahead and go to the next clip. The clip is Jeremy shouldn't feel offended. I think it is a 6-0. Are we now 6-0? Richard Bushman validated.
Oh yeah,
right.
All right, we're at 6-0. All right, let's go to the next one.
And so we all went through this fairly painful process from the early 1990s on till the present, where these things come into the open. And it's been hard on a lot of people. But I think the error is this feeling of betrayal.
Right. It's our own decision to be offended towards something sometimes. Obviously, there can be offense to be taken in some of these things because there probably were some people who weren't the most kind or loving to him as he did grapple with some of these questions and concerns.
But only because they thought he was truly wrong.
Right.
They weren't hiding anything from him.
Mm-hmm.
They thought he didn't have a basis for his belief.
Right. It's important to recognize the intent behind many of this stuff.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, there's so much there. Sandra, you want to start?
Well, yes, if we're talking about Jeremy's bishop probably really believed that the story was just the Urim and Thummim and not the stone and not magic and all those things. So yes, on the lower levels, Mormons tell you you're wrong because they really genuinely believe the standard story. But Bushman's conceding that the historians already knew the story. In 1990, he's already conceded that the church historians all knew what the real story was. So of course we felt betrayed. And they're conceding that. Yes, well, yeah, I can see why you'd feel betrayed. Well, I guess. But to dismiss it, well, they didn't know. Just the lower levels didn't know. The people in control of the printing press knew.
Yeah.
Gerardo?
I would agree. I think we.
Oh my gosh. I have so much to say here. Colby makes a funny point. Colby Reddish writes, "It's our own decision to be offended," says the group that started an entire podcast based on their offense to Jeremy Runnells' letter. That's brilliant. Like, again, I hate to come down on Richard Bushman because everyone loves him, but he lived through the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yes.
He literally watched Leonard Arrington. His whole history department goes from 1972 to 1982. It was completely shut down. Tell us, Sandra, why was Leonard Arrington's historical department shut down?
Because he was putting out or planning to put out too frank a history. And he's doing this 16-volume sesquicentennial history. And when the brethren started reading some of the drafts, they realized, oh my goodness, this is all too frank. We can't have this. So they want to shut it all down. So they promote him to BYU out of the church historian's office.
They get rid of the calling too, right?
To get rid of the calling of church historian.
And they don't even release him in general. They called him in general conference.
Mhm.
They release him not in general conference.
Because it was a general authority position, right?
I don't know.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yeah,
Mhm.
church historian.
He was the last one.
Okay.
Last one
Yeah.
with a, ecclesiastical position.
But for Bushman to sort of make the narrative say that it's in the 90s and 2000s where the brethren start this painful process of learning the truth about the church's history. Like, again, I don't know if Bushman's lying intentionally or if he's just compartmentalized his memory, because we've got the church history department shut down between 72 and 82. What happened with Dialogue in Sunstone and the church's treatment of Dialogue in Sunstone, Sandra?
Well, they started telling everyone to avoid reading them. We weren't to go to any symposiums. They were all evil, which was a direct hit at Sunstone. So, and they used to have the B.H. Roberts Society had annual meetings. Journal of Mormon History had annual meetings. And we were all being warned that we shouldn't be looking to these scholars. We should just be using the church manuals where what is official. You ask any Mormon questions back in those earlier days and bring up any of these problem areas, and it's, oh, well, that's not official. That's not official. That's not printed by the church. Well, when you went to what was official and printed by the church, it had the wrong narrative.
And I don't know if he's intentionally misleading people or just compartmentalizing, but he knows that the brethren knew the history was embarrassing and problematic, and that the factual history was a problem. He knows they knew in the 60s and in the 70s and in the 80s. So for him to make it sound like L. Tom Perry and Marvin J. Ashton, it wasn't until the late 90s and early 2000s that Boyd K. Packer learned about the truth about the church history. That seems to be what he's saying here.
Yeah.
And he knows better. He knows that they knew all along and were excommunicating and punishing historians for telling truthful history all the way along.
He also knows about the resistance inside church headquarters to publish the gospel topic essays that would finally make the church come clean on all these issues. He knows that it was not we just learned about the seer stone, let's write an essay about it. It was, like he says, he uses the word painful. It was literally painful for the brethren to want to come clean about all these issues, because I think the unwritten policy for the brethren had been to not talk about things that are inconvenient for the church. You know, like Boyke Packer said, some things that are true are not useful.
Yeah. Can we please respond to this allegation this dude makes? I'm already forgetting his name. What's his name? The host guy? Easton. That people who feel betrayed, disillusioned, deceived for the church misleading them about their history are choosing to be offended.
I mean,
can we please address that?
he's taking the playbook from David Bednar.
No, but can we just give our honest reaction
Well,
to
it's
how
like
offensive and insulting that we're just choosing to be offended?
it's like telling the wife who finds out her husband's been cheating on her for years, you're just choosing to be offended.
Yeah. Or how about the LGBTQ community, Gerardo?
Yeah.
Like, oh, we wanted to kill ourselves because you told us that we were choosing to be gay because we masturbated or because we didn't have a good relationship with our dad. And so we want to die. But we're just choosing to be offended?
Yeah.
At that?
Now that you change your mind, and don't take a position on
I mean, Julia, do you have a reaction? Can
Well,
we just
yeah,
get them
like-
to stop saying that?
Right. Or like even these new trans policies, it's like they're having to be followed to the bathroom. They're having to be like they're like treated like a criminal, like they can't be around kids or like youth. Like they're it's really silly to say that they're choosing to be offended. that Jeremy-
I don't mean to correct you, not silly, demeaning and
Yes.
insulting.
Yes.
And it's offensive. Cut it out. Stop it. Stop saying we choose to be offended. And Bushman himself agrees with me.
Yeah.
That's the crazy thing. All right. So, so should we keep going? Let's go to the next clip. The next clip, Joseph Smith's treasure digging is degrading. I think it's 7-0. 7-0 Bushman validating Jeremy and the CES letter. Let's go to the next one.
As we go through the response that you wrote, you say the CES author of the translation entry also described the seer stone as faintly absurd. Quote, Joseph used the same magic device or Ouija board that he used during his treasure hunting days. He put a rock called a peepstone in his hat and put his face in the hat to tell his customers the location of buried treasure on their property. The whole scene is made to appear ludicrous. How would you, or why is it not ludicrous? The CES letter author says these are kind of crazy things, and you're saying, well, they're not as ludicrous as they may seem. Mm-hmm. Why is that?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is an old Mormon embarrassment that the seer stone was something that had to be obscured because it was degrading to think of Joseph Smith as a treasure seeker. That, I think, is a mistaken historical outlook.
Okay. I mean, what's Bushman saying there? What's Bushman saying there, Sandra?
Well, he wants to downplay the absurdness of the story by saying, oh, well, it was common in the area. Everyone was doing magic. It wouldn't have been absurd in the time. And it just looks absurd to us now because we don't believe in those kinds of things. Well, yes, that's why it looks absurd, because we now know that rocks don't really work.
But what I heard him say is that Mormons have been embarrassed about this stone in the hat narrative. Mm-hmm. From the very beginning. They viewed it as embarrassing and degrading. So I think that's 8-0 wherever we are in the number, because Bushman's basically agreeing with Jeremy that it's an embarrassing story. Am I wrong? Is that what he was saying?
Joseph saw it as embarrassing once he moves to Kirtland, away from the money digger crowd up in New York. That's why he has to change the revelations about the seer stone and Cowdery's rod and these different things. Is because he is embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
He, in his 38 history, when he writes about his working for Stoll, oh, well, this is how all these stories came about me being a money digger, because I worked for Stoll. Well, yeah, the reason he's working for Stoll is because he had the rock that gave this a special magical direction of where to go dig for the treasure. Joseph sees the embarrassment of it, and they've been downplaying it ever since.
Isn't there an account of Joseph like sobbing to his father-in-law saying he's going to stop doing this crazy stuff?
Yeah, right.
That's Isaac Hale.
Isaac
what's
Hale.
the account, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, after the 26th trial, then the next year he tells Hale that he's given up all, well, the angel tells Joseph he's got to give up the money digging stuff. And so he finally does and tells his father-in-law, I've given up all that sort of stuff. And so he goes to live on the father's in-law's farm. And I thought, oh my goodness, what a surprise to poor Mr. Hale, because when he moves down there with Emma, yes, he's not digging for treasures anymore. No, he ends up telling his father-in-law, oh, by the way, we're going to be spending all our time in the front room with me with a rock in my hat, translating a book from plates you can't see. So
yeah,
Joseph switches careers, but it's no better than the one he had before.
Right. Julia.
Well, that account, like, I love that story. That account comes from Peter Ingersoll from E.D. Howe's Mormonism Unveiled. And so a lot of people just discredit that whole thing. It's like, oh, it was published in that book, so we can't accept it. But so it wasn't Isaac Hale specifically, but yeah.
How do you find E.D. Howe credible or not, Sandra?
Well, I think that the stories from the neighbors all are credible. Now, there's parts of E.D. Howe I don't like. I don't care for he's the one that got us all sidetracked on Solomon Spaulding's stuff. And I think that's a whole nother issue. But the stories of the money digging that are in E.D. Howe are not just dependent on E.D. Howe's book.
Right.
We have Mother Smith verifying the magic involvement. In her manuscript history, she talks about the family seeking the faculty of abrac. That's magic.
Yeah.
Abracadabra stuff.
Yeah.
It's not just from anti-Mormon sources. You have Mormon sources that concede the magic money digging scenario.
Julia, tell us why you've got a photo of Hannah Stoddard here. We were dying to know.
So this book, so she, is it her husband? Who's this other guy? There's
I'm
two
not sure.
in this book. I don't know who the other author is specifically in relation to her, but he's James Stoddard and Hannah Stoddard. So they wrote this book, and the whole book I think is, and I read it as a member, or I tried to, but even then I could recognize that it's not, they're not accepting a lot of parts of history. So anyway, but she writes in here that
What's the name of the book? What's the name of the book?
It's Seer Stone versus Yearman Thumb, the Book of Mormon Translation on Trial. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to weigh the evidence for the spectacles or the seer stone. And they come out saying, oh, the seer stone, here, I'll just read it. She says, if we accept that Joseph Smith dictated the Book of Mormon using a dark occultic seer stone he presumably found from an alleged career in treasure digging, scrying, and magic, this means the Book of Mormon was revealed through an occultic instrument and not by revelation and instruments provided by God. No true Christian can accept as God's word a book which came from this bitter fountain. The very foundation of our faith crumble.
Amen. Preach it, sister.
Yes. Who does she think she is? Being a believing Mormon, basically telling the modern prophets and revelators that they're all wrong.
They got it wrong.
That she's got the story right, but that they've all got it wrong, but she still sustains the church.
Yeah.
And sustains the brethren. By the way, Julia, the other dude, the other Stoddard, according to Dan Vogel, is
James?
the dad.
Oh, it's the dad. So it's
not
father,
the
daughter.
brother.
Okay, not okay.
But how does she think she's okay correcting the brethren? I'm confused. Like the church has released its gospel.
I mean, she has a point.
Essay.
She has a point. If she accepts it, everything crumbles. And I don't think she wants to let her faith crumble.
I mean, yeah, she's admitting it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yes, and she's directly opposite of what Bushman is conceding in all of his books and in this interview. Bushman is freely conceding in this. It all came through the stone. And he says in the interview, I'm not ashamed of this. Yes, it all came through the stone.
So this next clip we have, I want to meet the person that convinced Mormon president and prophet Russell M. Nelson to do this.
And he did it.
Go ahead, Julia.
I think he did it June of 2020. So this is like, so Like Hannah Stoddard wrote her book in 2019, and this is just like a year later. That's the best date I could find for this clip.
And tell us what we're about to see, Julia, for those who are just
I
listening.
can't remember the sister involved in this. Does anyone recognize her? That she's
I
in,
don't know, primary
like
presidency.
or primary. Oh yeah, it's the primary presidency. You're right. I can't remember her name. But so President Nelson is going to demonstrate how the translation process looked like, what that looked like.
All right. And you got a hat on a table. And I'm wondering if there's a stone in the hat. So let's play the clip.
Quite miraculous, really, through the gift and power of God. We have a lot of suggestions about how it was done. We know that they had a table like this. We know they had the golden plates covered usually. And Joseph used these Urim and Thummim, seer stones in the hat, and it was easier for him to see the light when he'd take that position.
Did you just say it's easier to see the light when you stick your face in a hat?
I think
Well, you can see the writing on the stone.
Yeah.
The
Right.
light from the stone would shine better. Like reading your text message in the dark.
Oh my
I just want to
gosh.
be in the strategy meeting where it's like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have Nelson with the primary president in a room with a white hat, and he's going to pick it up and bring it towards his face. What did they think they were
I don't
accomplishing?
think it
here?
was scripted. You can tell that it was not scripted.
Everything
He
they do
does
is
it, and
scripted. Everything they do is planned and scripted.
I
The
don't
camera's rolling. Like, do you think they just accidentally had a hat on the table
Well,
and he accidentally mentions the
I
hat
don't
in the
know.
translation?
Well, it makes you wonder if the prop was planned, but it makes you wonder, though, if they really practiced him picking up the hat and bringing it up to his face.
yeah.
Yeah,
Of course they did.
You think so?
He looks a
Okay.
little awkward, and then I think after he does it, he's kind of like,
I must look really stupid right now. Right?
Wait, so I want to also, something that I thought was interesting is that the church released these new videos that they sometimes play at the visitor centers. I've seen them in Nauvoo, and they're like Days of Harmony or something like that. There's two newer ones that they put out, and they released pictures of Joseph Smith using this hat on the table, but in the film you only see a tiny corner that kind of sticks out. That's the only time they show the hat in the stone. So like even like they'll use in their photography, they'll show the stone, Joseph, putting his face in the hat, but in the video itself, they never show that. So I thought that was interesting too.
And it's also interesting how he's trying to be a little sneaky, Nelson, when he's saying seer, he would put the seer stones in the hat. I think he's trying to appeal to those people that believe of a Urim and Thummim pair of glasses of two things, and trying to make those people still believe that it was the Urim and Thummim that he was putting in the hat.
Yeah, but the Urim and Thummim would have been too big to use in the hat, which is why he's using a rock.
Right.
Really quickly, we've got some comments we need to read. Nathaniel Wilkerson writes, "You are all legends, and your work will impact thousands for many years to come. Thank you for waking up the Mormon world." I think that's 99% Sandra and 1% the rest of us. But thanks for that comment. Susan Groom writes, "Thanks for these valuable conversations. Julia, Gerardo, Sandra, and John, you are the voices of truth." Isn't it nice that people are kind? A couple others. Thank you, Darlene Lane, for that super chat. Thank you, A. Adams and Brian Felden. And then finally, Sentient Dreamer writes, thank you for your outrage and acknowledgement. So he's allowing us to be angry. He's not invalidating our feelings by saying that anger means that we're just bitter and choosing to be offended. Okay, we have a lot of clips to show. Should we speed it up a little bit?
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. Let's go to the next clip. And it's entitled Part of Working Class Culture. Julia, I need your help. Are we at 8-0? What are we at? You got to keep a running
Is it
tally,
9
Julia.
now?
Is
I
it
feel like
9-0?
I
Okay.
feel like it
Write
might be
down 9-0.
Okay.
And then you got to remind me so I'll forget. Okay. Part of the working class culture.
The folk magic, which we're talking about here, was prevalent all through the Western world. I'm talking about Europe
Right.
and England now, right up to the middle of the 18th century. About then, as the Enlightenment comes on, what was commonplace belief in seer stones, there's a member of Parliament who uses a seer stone in the 1600s. That was just part of sort of the edges of Christian belief. Then, as science began to increase in authority and influence, that became considered below grade, crude, raw. But it remained in the farm, lower class levels of society, especially all over England, but especially in New England and Pennsylvania in the United States. So the Whitmers were into folk magic, as many Germans were. And so what we think is shameful was just part of sort of working class.
Did Richard Bushman just call Joseph Smith's practices crude, raw, lower class, and shameful? Did I hear that right?
Yes, that's what I heard.
And is that what Jeremy was basically saying?
Yeah.
In
Yes,
the CES letter?
Yeah, this is a number 10, I think, on what we've all been saying.
Julia?
Well, also, like, he's also saying, oh, David Whitmer was also, gullible and, involved in all those things. Like, so, and that was
They all
another thing I
believe
think
in all
Jeremy,
this stuff.
right. And I think Jeremy also had a problem with that in a different section, talking about the witnesses, how, like, why are we taking these men seriously? Because they're stooped in these things.
Right.
So, like, maybe 11
Well, it isn't just that they're stooped in magic, it has to work.
Right.
Right.
Because the stone works. It's not that they were just superstitious. Bushman has to be confirming its value when he says the stone really has these abilities.
Is anybody bothered that when we like what they say, they're prophets, seers, and revelators, when we don't like what they say, they're products of their time?
Yes.
Which isn't that heads I win, tails you lose, basically?
Yeah,
Right. But
Yeah.
also,
and how
also this-
prevalent was it, right? Because if I remember right, you found a quote by, was it
Benjamin Franklin,
yeah.
like in the mid 1700s, was
Yes.
saying there's this ridiculous con called treasure digging. Like Benjamin Franklin was calling out in the mid 1700s.
And not only that, but then it was illegal.
Oh, 100%.
Right.
That's why there were laws against it when Joseph was doing it, because it was a long known con.
So was it a practice that everyone was doing and
No.
everyone believed?
It was a kooky, fringy, rare, ridiculous, culty fraud.
Well, and this is
Isaac
the
Hales didn't believe it.
No.
this is the
Right.
reason that Joseph Smith couldn't join the Methodist Church when he tried, because when he was going to the Methodist meetings, we don't know how weekly, I assume, the probationary class to join the Methodist Church, you have this discussion of how long he was actually a member of the class by men that ran the class, but they wouldn't let him join ultimately because he wouldn't repent of his magic money digging claims.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
I didn't know
and-
that either.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Wes Walters did an article on his attempt to join the Methodist Church. We have an article on our website about this. He gets married to
20,
Emma.
24, 25. Oh, after.
No, I think
Oh,
it's
later.
after.
Oh, okay.
That he tries to join the Methodist.
Oh,
and
yeah,
they
it was
won't.
after one of their children died, right? To seek comfort, I think, is one of the reasons why people say you don't try to join.
Dan Vogel writes they didn't want a necromancer in the class.
Oh my God.
Right. Yes. So it was the lower class families in New England that followed these magic practices, and the Methodists were not thinking it was a cool practice, and they weren't going to let a necromancer join their church.
Yeah.
So,
But it wasn't all of the lower class. I'll just say that too, because like if you research Joseph Smith's certain digs, where it's like the pirate that he was digging for, in the local newspapers, they were saying, "Don't give into this con. This is just silly. Like, don't do it." And so, like, and then like you have the 1826 trial where I can't remember the relation of but the nephew of the one doing the treasure digging, he was worried that his uncle was being conned. Like, so it wasn't all of the lower class did not accept this as as a thing.
No,
it was just certain people. Yeah.
Yeah.
But keep
Right.
going, Sandra.
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
Well, and that this is the reason Joseph has to elope with Emma, because Isaac Hale is opposed to Joseph's necromancy. He doesn't think Joseph has any decent job.
We have the coolest fact checker on the planet. Dan Vogel says, yes, right. after the baby died in June 1828. And can someone explain to me, if Joseph was visited by God and Jesus in 1820 and told not to join any church, but to start the one and only true church, to restore the one and only true church, why was he trying to join the Methodist Church in 1828? Can you explain that to me, Sandra?
Well, it leaves you a little wondering on that, isn't it? and if his mom believed his story, why does she take her kids into the Presbyterian Church after he supposedly has had the first vision?
Moroni is instructing him of all this doctrine every year for 4 years before the plates, but then he doesn't know that Alvin is going to be saved. He doesn't, that, and all this stuff happens, making his family join the Presbyterian Church, and he doesn't seem to think, oh, I gotta tell him that God and Jesus appeared to me and told me that all these churches are corrupt.
Yeah, why is he trying to be a Methodist?
Yeah. There's a reason that the first account of the first vision that we have is 1832. It's because he made it up sometime right before 1832, right?
Yeah, evidently.
I mean, because in 28, he's trying to join another church.
Yeah.
All right. Next clip is entitled Joseph Smith Changed His History. Wait, Julia, what's the count?
Oh, are we at 12? Are we
10,
at 12 now?
11?
12. Yeah,
I think we're at
12, I think.
Sandra says 12.
Now.
Write it down, Julia.
Okay,
We're at
I'm
12.
writing it down. Yep.
All right. Joseph Smith changed his history.
What happens is in 1834, E.D. Howe, a journalist from Painesville, nearby to Kirtland, published a book in which he trotted out all the evidence he could find from the neighbors that the Smiths were practicing money digging. And this was to discredit them. And I think that's the first time that the Smiths begin to feel like, well, this is something to be embarrassed about. And so they begin to change the story. Instead of talking about seer stones or spectacles, they use the word Urim and Thummim. And because that was a biblical term, and sort of gave some dignity to this searching. And so ever since then, we've been embarrassed by something that for the Smiths was part of everyday life. Wasn't embarrassing at all. In fact, it probably played a large part in their ability to accept the gold plates as legitimate.
Right. There's a lot of presentism in that, right? Of recognizing, well, we're in the 21st century, so it's going to seem a little bit different than it would have in the 19th century.
Did he just say that God had to go to a people that were gullible to give them the golden plates? Because otherwise, other type of people wouldn't have believed it.
Why are you laughing, Julia?
Well, at the end, just like where he was, like, what did he say at the end? It was really funny where he's like, oh, I can't remember. But that was a good point, Gerardo.
I mean, and did he just admit that Joseph Smith changed the narrative once he realized it was an embarrassing, ridiculous, unbelievable narrative that he rewrote and changed his history, gave things new names,
biblical names,
and gave it a more religious and spiritual context because he knew the folk magic context was both illegal and fraudulent. Did he just admit that?
Yes. And I mean, I think it's astounding that he needed to go to people that believed in magic rocks showing you where to divine for treasure in order to believe that God could use a magic rock to translate gold plates that no one gets to see.
Yeah. Conveniently, once Joseph wants to start converting other people that are not really into seer stones and treasure digging, that's when Moroni takes the plates up to heaven.
Yeah, exactly. Dan's fact checking me. He says that Dan writes 1832 account has no command not to join any church, but Joseph Smith is saved by faith. I was referencing the official narrative.
Yeah.
The 1838 official narrative contrasted with his actual behavior in 1828. But Dan, we love you keeping us honest. So keep that up. Julie, any other
Yeah,
comments?
I remember Maven, you had her comment poke up really fast, but the presentism idea, because Easton's like, oh, people are getting confused because they're bringing presentism in, but like, no, we've already established like that's why he was brought to trial. It was against the law. They were warning people against treasure digging in the newspapers. Like Benjamin Franklin in the 1720s was like, this is like hogwash. Don't buy into it. Like, it's not presentism. It's just not.
All right. So the count, what's the count, Julia? Maven's saying 13. Is that where we
Yeah,
are?
it would be. I guess we're 13 now.
All right. Richard Bushman, as the referee, says Jeremy Runnells 13, Mormon Church Honesty 0. All right. The next clip is entitled "It Wasn't a Real Lie."
As part of that, though, I think that some people may have concerns that the history was changed or that the narrative was changed a little bit. How would you help those people recognize the history and what is actually true, and how to determine what is changed of the narrative or what is the actual truth of it?
Well, it was changed. The Smiths immediately began trying to bury the fact. Joseph Smith played down his treasure-seeking background as just a little episode which Josiah stole, just dismissed as something. Lucy Smack did the same. And what's, I think, significant is they changed from the Book of Commandments to the Doctrine and Covenants. They changed one of the revelations to insert the word Urim and Thummim. See, that's acceptable, desirable versus seer stone. So the church was trying to cover up, in that case, Joseph Smith's involvement with treasure seeking.
I think that may make some people nervous that the church is trying to cover up the truth. How would you help them through something that might cause dissonance like that?
You just have to accept the fact that they didn't want to be made to look silly.
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to be made to look silly? So if Joseph's associated with the wrong class of people, you do your best to make him look better.
Right.
It wasn't a real lie. It was just sort of subordinating or retelling the story.
Sure.
And who doesn't retell the stories of their lives to make them look better?
Right.
I could not believe that
Okay,
clip.
one thing I just realized, Richard Bushman is acknowledging that Urim and Thummim, the God preserving Urim and Thummim thing, is all made up.
Yeah.
And was added later.
Oh, absolutely.
So he doesn't believe in a Urim and Thummim.
Not just that, but he's admitting that Joseph Smith changed scripture.
Yeah.
That the Book of Commandments, that was revelation, that was scripture. And he's admitting, which we've shown in the LDS discussion series, that they literally just, when they would print a new version of the Doctrine and Covenants, they would take out stuff they didn't like. They would add things that weren't there before, and they would change things that they didn't like. And Bushman just admitted that not only do they lie and deceive, but that they literally alter scripture to lie and deceive. That's outrageous, but it gets even worse. He admits that Lucy lied. He admits that Joseph lied, that they changed scripture. And then he admits that why they did it, that they did it so they wouldn't be made to look nervous, so they wouldn't be made to look silly. And then he says, and I think he's giving his own signals there, right? He says, who doesn't lie to try and make themselves look better? Which means that he must do that or he wouldn't be saying it. And I'm going to say, I don't think I lie to try and make myself look better. I would rather say something bad about myself that's true than lie to try and make myself look better. So number one, I disagree with him that most people lie to make themselves look better. Sandra, do you lie intentionally to make yourself look better?
Well, maybe it depends on who you ask. I try not to.
No, I do. Do you, Gerardo? Do you lie to try and make yourself look better?
Well, even if I'm trying to think really hard on where I would have done that, but I mean, certainly would be something that you wouldn't expect from a prophet of God, who's telling the story about how the church came about, to be doing that.
Yeah, and what did the church teach us about honesty?
Yeah.
What What happens if you're?
It's a temple recommend question.
What happens if you're going to go on a mission and you kind of, lie to make yourself look a little bit better in terms of what you did or didn't do with your girlfriend before your mission? What does the church do? Do they pat you on the back and say, "Oh, you're just doing what Joseph Smith did"? What do they do? What do they do?
They discipline you.
Yeah, they like literally shame you. They make you come home early from your mission. They may disfellowship you, and they embarrass you in front of your parents, your family, the entire congregation. They don't laugh and go, "Ha, ha, ha, you were just trying to make yourself look a little bit better than you really were." But Bushman is just totally saying that's what people do.
Yeah. And that we should accept it.
And he's saying that's what the leaders did. That's what Joseph Smith did. Like, for me, this was probably the most disturbing part. And I don't mean to be unkind or unfair to Bushman, because it's true. People embellish. I mean, what he's saying is it's the fish story, right? The fish was this big. No wait, it was this big. No wait, it was this big. He's saying humans have a tendency to embellish. But does that trivialize the severity of this particular situation when people are paying 10% of their income, consecrating their entire lives to their church, making all the most important decisions about who to marry, when to marry, how many kids to have? Like, is it trivial? And is he downplaying the severity of what's going on here?
Absolutely.
Definitely downplaying.
Julia, do you have a thought? You seem
No, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Like, this is a big deal. And for him to say it's not a real lie, like, what is it? Like, it is a lie. Joseph's taking the seer stone out of the picture, and he's like, oh no, it was these divine things that were preserved. Like, he is lying.
Lying about something very, very serious.
Right.
I don't know. I guess we're
Right.
beating a dead horse, but I think this dismissal, like the fact that Bushman would show up and talk about it. I mean, it explains why Rough Stone Rolling is so apologetic, right? Because he's willing. Like, isn't Rough Stone Rolling an example of Bushman stretching the truth to make Joseph Smith and the church look better than it probably would if he told the real truth? I mean, certainly we have to give him credit that it's the most accurate and honest portrayal of Joseph Smith written by a faithful Mormon.
Yeah.
But that's not saying a lot.
Right. He's still sugarcoating it.
Yeah.
He is, right? And he's basically telling that Joseph Smith Rough Stone Rolling, he sugarcoated it probably to make Joseph Smith look better.
Yeah.
Right.
Which he did, right?
Yeah.
Anyone who's read it would say it's not fully honest and fully accurate.
Well,
The punches were pulled.
and the arguments don't really make sense. This idea that he tries to advance, that the treasure digging Joseph Smith was engaging in was him practicing his powers. I mean, that doesn't make any sense when you put it into context, and then listen to what he's saying later, where like Joseph is embarrassed about it. Why would he be embarrassed about it if he was practicing his powers?
Well, his powers weren't working very good because they never find anything. So it was not a good schooling.
He was going to jail and changing his story later and apologizing for what he did.
Yeah.
So it was a good thing. Anyway, all right, next clip. This clip is entitled, "What was the purpose of the plates?" Good question. Wait, Julia,
What?
where are we at? I think there were 2 or 3 in that one, but
Oh,
where are
okay.
we at in the count?
If there's 2 in that one, so we're at 15.
Okay, I think
50.
there was more, but 15.
Oh,
we'll
there
go
might
with
be.
15.
Absolutely.
We'll go with 15. All right, next clip.
What is the purpose of the plates if they lay covered on the table while the translation commenced and proceeded?
Well, it's hard to answer. We don't really have an answer, but they are important. They're not just left under the bed. They sit on the table wrapped. So their presence is significant. And the problem is we don't know the technology of translation, revealed translation here. So just how it works. But it's sort of like the Book of Abraham manuscripts. The
Wow.
scholarship seems to show that what was on the scrolls we actually have is not what's in the Book of Abraham.
Right.
And so the scrolls are sort of like the plates. They're present, but they are not really containing the message.
Maybe they're fake too.
So there's some kind of stimulus or provocation or something that starts the revelatory process. On the other hand, you take the Kinderhook plates, these little sort of brass-like tablets
Right.
that had writing on them, and Joseph Smith looks at them for a while, maybe tries to translate them, and then gives up on it. They don't perform that function. They don't work. So there's some difference in what will start this process going and what not. But I think it's an error for us to try to figure out how that really works. It's a couple of centuries ahead of us in
Right.
engineering knowledge.
Hmm.
What the heck? Why are you? So, like in a couple centuries, there's going to be some scientist that's like studying around the center's going to rock.
Yes. If you give us enough time. Oh, dear. But he gives away the game in this. This is the most astounding segment that you could get. That the plates are like the papyri.
He's not doing the Book of Mormon any favor comparing it to the Book of Abraham.
So there's no connection to reality because the document is not going to be what produces the final product. And then to bring in the Kinderhook plates, which were a forgery by someone else to trick Joseph Smith. I mean, his whole scenario, I don't think he thought this through well enough.
What is he talking about? Some engineer in 200 years is gonna, like, oh my gosh, I figured it out. You can talk to rocks and they'll tell you exactly what God wants you to know. And he's going to publish this in Nature magazine. Like, what's going to happen in 200 years? Literally, can someone tell me what's going to happen in 200 years?
Well, that's kind of what he's implying is going to happen.
It's this advanced technology. It's like nuclear fission, like fusion. What is it?
Yeah.
But he's admitting
It's a cell
that the
phone.
Book of Mormon, what Joseph's saying, has no basis in reality. Because when he compares it to the Book of Abraham,
Yeah,
when
that's
he's
a big
saying
deal. Yeah.
that the papyri have no connection to the message of the Book of Abraham, and he compares that with the Book of Mormon, then is he saying those plates have no connection to what Joseph's dictating?
Well, they weren't in the room.
Right.
Of course they have no connection. That's why it really is an apt comparison. Like, for those of you who don't know, the Book of Abraham allegedly was translated by papyri that had, quote, Reformed Egyptian on it, or Egyptian. But we now know that the word Abraham didn't even appear on the papyri, and the church admits this. So now the church has this catalyst theory idea that the Egyptian scroll, even though it wasn't written by the hand of Abraham, which Joseph claimed, the scroll was necessary to inspire Joseph to channel direct revelation from God, even though Joseph thought he was translating the Egyptian hieroglyphs into something. So it's ridiculous. And now Joseph has been, Richard Bushman is actually admitting that the Book of Mormon was on the same level of ridiculousness as the Book of Abraham.
Yeah.
And this is the move that Spencer Fluman from the Maxwell Institute signaled to us 5-ish years ago when he started telling people that the Book of Mormon was Joseph Smith's greatest what? Revelation, not translation. So now the church is backing away from the idea that he was a translator, which was his original gift, by the way, wasn't it?
Yes.
And didn't the Doctrine and Covenants said something like he should not aspire for any other gift other than translate?
And that was changed later. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, until he is finished with that one. But yeah, well, I think this segment, it's a classic. Everyone needs to listen to that segment again to realize the concession he's making, that the Book of Mormon is a revelated book. It is not a translation of an artifact. It
Yeah.
is something that Joseph Smith is dictating that is not connected to the plates.
Yeah, and yeah, it makes no sense, and we're having way too much fun. And
he really concedes the idea that that Dan Vogel has proposed, that Joseph Smith fabricated the plates, and that's why he had to cover them up, because they couldn't pass physical inspection. But Richard Bushman is advancing this idea. Well, he needed to make the plates, so then this would make his revelatory juices start working. So even though they're probably, they could be fake, just like the Book of Abraham papyri had nothing to do with Abraham. They had to be in the room so Joseph could be inspired to produce the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. And again, you got to watch the LDS discussion series. You can find it on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, or on the playlist on the Mormon Stories podcast page. But we've already established, Sandra, I remember for the first time picking up a replica of the golden plates made with a lighter metal than gold was, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I could barely lift them. I could barely stand to lift a replica of the golden plates that was lighter than what the golden plates would have been. And so if the golden plates had actually been real, made with gold, Joseph couldn't have even lifted them, let alone Emma dusting under them, right?
Yeah. So the size of the plates that Joseph Smith gives us, 6 by 6 by 8, a piece gold plates would have weighed over 200 pounds. The model we had in our bookstore was 118 pounds.
And there's a video of me trying to lift them. Yeah, there's a video of my
plates.
interview with you.
Yeah. And so you can't pick it up and dust underneath at 118 pounds. I don't care if it's 50 pounds. I don't see Emma picking those up to dust under them. The plates cannot be a genuine artifact because everyone says they had the witnesses talk about something that weighs around 40 pounds or thereabouts. But the story makes no sense if you're using actual gold plates. And that's why the church has to say, well, they were gold-like. They weren't really full gold, other than the fact that the angel said they were gold. Right. But other than that.
And I take Bushman at his word that he believes there were gold plates, which is ridiculous in and of itself.
Fake or real, though?
But that's the thing, is that on the one hand, Bushman really thinks the existence of actual plates is important, but he's smart enough to know that Joseph could have made them out of tin or brass or whatever, probably tin, and that because he wouldn't let anyone actually see them except by, second sight or their spiritual eyes, the fact that he was covering them up, he knows that they could have been manufactured. And that's Dan Vogel's view, that yes, there were plates, but when Joseph came back with an injured hand, it's because he was actually fashioning the plates out of common tin that would have been made available. There's an episode on Mormon Stories where we had someone actually make replicas of the plates using tin and tools that would have been available at the time. I've got those plates over there. My point is that Richard Bushman, on the one hand, wants to say the plates were incredibly important because people needed an actual artifact, but he doesn't acknowledge that they could have very easily been faked and had to have been faked.
Yeah.
They had to have been faked because there's no way golden heavy plates could have ever been practical in the lived scenario, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And he concedes when he compares it to the Book of Abraham, that's a concession that the plates could have said anything about anything, even if they were real. They could have been fabricated by someone real as a physical object. Who knows if what was written on them actually said what the Book of Mormon claims they said, because the Book of Abraham clearly doesn't, and we have the papyri to prove it.
Yeah.
And I do want to call him out on the Kinderhook plates when he tries to say, well, because the Kinderhook plates were fake, he gave up on them. I think Julia has a slide for it.
All right, let's go. What's the slide, Julia?
Yeah, so this is taken directly from the history of the church. So Richard Bushman says, oh, he tried and it didn't work. But that's not what the history of the church says. This is Joseph. This is being written in Joseph's voice. It says, I, Joseph Smith, have translated a portion of them, meaning the Kinderhook plates, which they're displayed here on this slide, and find that they contain the history of the person with whom they were found. He was a descendant of Ham through the loins of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and that he received his kingdom from the ruler of heaven and earth. And so, like, he's saying that he translated some. And so, like, Richard Bushman, I don't know why he says that it didn't work, because it did. It doesn't make sense.
He tries to say that he looks at them and then he gave up on the project, which is true. He didn't really ever finish a translation project, but he didn't finish the Book of Abraham. He didn't finish the Book of Moses.
He didn't finish the Book of Mormon.
He didn't finish. I mean, yeah, right. And
the sealed portion.
And
right.
he didn't finish the translation of the Bible. Like, there's most of the projects, especially the ones that he was picking up in Nauvoo, just were like left unfinished.
So he either got that wrong, didn't know it, misremembered it.
Yeah.
But it's misleading people.
Yeah.
He just misled people there.
Yeah.
Right, Sandra?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Julia?
I also think it's really interesting when scholars try to answer a question, like a concern, like we're concerned about Joseph Smith's use of the seer stone. And I think it's funny when they're like, oh yeah, but the Book of Abraham. And like, if you weren't aware of the Book of Abraham, now you are. Or if you weren't aware of the Kinderhook plates, now you are. Or now you might go look into it. I just think it's funny that they try to answer concerns and then bring up other concerns too. But maybe they're just trying to be more open.
Yeah. All right. The next clip is entitled, It Doesn't Matter If the Book of Mormon Was Broadly Reshaped.
A question people often ask is, was it a word-for-word translation? Was it just kind of the message translated? Or was it just direct revelation? And from what I've read, it doesn't matter as much what the exact answer is to that.
No, it used to be that if you had any kind of language that seemed to be 19th century, not ancient Nephite language, that was a stroke against the authenticity of the translation. That's no longer true. There are faithful church members who say it has to have 19th century language in it in order for it to be intelligible. And it might have been quite broadly reshaped in order to make it valuable in the 19th century. So at this point, this is not an argument between believers and non-believers. It's among believers who are struggling to find the evidence and to dope out somehow how it all happened. I personally don't think there's a lot at stake. It's an interesting curiosity and worth looking at, but it doesn't really affect the truth of the Book of Mormon.
Right.
All right, Julie, you're audibly gasping. We'll let you go first.
Where he's like, it doesn't matter if it was broadly reshaped. Like it used to matter if there was 19th century writing in there. Like, it doesn't matter anymore. Like, yes, it does. If this book is not historical, it's not real. Joseph just wrote it. He just made it up. Like, I feel like he's saying it's not a historical text. Did you guys get anything different than that?
No, yeah, he's basically saying if it was plagiarized and if there are anachronisms that invalidate the book, and like you said, Julie, if it's not historical, it doesn't matter. And by the way, what's the committee that decides if 19th century text in the Book of Mormon is a problem or not? It's like he's saying that because progressive liberal Mormons in 2024 have been able to use motivated reasoning and bad logic to provide self-justification for this stupid catalyst theory and applying it to the Book of Mormon, that somehow that obviates the problem. He's pulling like a Yoda, these are not the droids you're looking for sort of thing. But how in the world do plagiarisms and anachronisms and 19th century relics not invalidate the Book of Mormon in 2024? Sandra, who's the committee that gets to decide this?
Well, I'm not sure, but I think scholars that I know would think that would be an important factor. How are we to determine if something is an ancient text? I would think the discussion of the literary composition would be important. One of the important things in determining whether something's an ancient text. If I told you I had found Columbus' diary about sailing to America, and you're reading along and all of a sudden it says they listen to the radio in the evenings for entertainment, that would invalidate the record. You would say that can't be Columbus' record because it's anachronism in there. One anachronism would disqualify the whole product. And the Mormons are trying to get away from this problem that scholars outside of the faith thinks pretty obvious. When you find anachronisms in the Book of Mormon, it does affect the validity of claiming it as an ancient text.
It absolutely does. And again, this is where Richard Bushman is getting more respect than he deserves, because he carries the mantle of a scholar.
Yeah.
He brings Columbia University and like best historian in the world on Joseph Smith and the whole world of academia. He brings that with him. But he knows full well that there's not a single credible academic scholarly historian outside of Mormonism that would find any of this believable. In fact, they would all find it ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so he's basically saying we can find faithful progressive Mormon scholars, and I say that in quotes, at BYU who are still believers.
Well, they're being kicked out of BYU nowadays.
Right. But
yeah.
But the fact that he can name some BYU scholars who would literally lose their jobs and their livelihood and their respect and their reputations if they denounce the church and the Book of Mormon's truth claims. The fact that he can find BYU scholars on the payroll who will still sign up to the Book of Mormon being valid, he thinks that that's somehow credible evidence that the Book of Mormon shouldn't be disregarded as a fraud. It's weird. It's weird logic for someone who claims to be a scholar from a university like Columbia. Am I wrong?
Yes, it's very disappointing, but it's understandable for those of us raised in the Mormon system, it's understandable that he has to go that route, but it's an embarrassment for the academic world that he can go that kind of a defense.
Yeah, it really is. It really is embarrassing. All right. Do we know the count, Julia? I think
gosh.
We must be up to 25.
Yeah,
I don't know. He was after all that.
Yeah,
20 at least.
So we're already over the 3-hour mark, and Gerardo is saying it may make sense to kind of skip a few of the slides. So Gerardo, what slide do you think we should?
So we can go to the next one. I think the next one is important.
Which one?
The one right next after this
Oh,
one. Did Joseph
fabricate the plates?
Yeah, let's.
Okay, we'll just do a couple more. Viewers and listeners, you've been very patient. We've got a live audience of over 1,000, so we know you're loving this. At some point, Sandra and Gerardo have to go home. Julia's got stuff to do. Margie's waiting for me. We've just got a couple more clips we'll play. Watch the whole thing when you have a minute. This is, did Joseph Smith fabricate the plates? Good question.
As we talk about the golden plates and how they were there and wrapped with a cloth, there are people who did see them. We have the 3 and the 8 witnesses and Joseph Smith and a number of other random people. But there are many people who didn't see them who people are concerned that they should have, such as Emma Smith. Why do you believe some were able to see it and some were not able to, especially somebody so close who helped with the translation process like Emma Smith?
Yeah. Why would Emma Smith not see them? And David Whitmer's mother
exactly
supposedly did see them. Of course, that's the modern feminist question, and rightly so. It's hard to know how those witnesses were. But she did feel the plates. I mean, granted, seeing is a little different than feeling, but she wasn't cut off from the plates. She probably knew as much about them as anyone did. She was closer to them. Maybe only Oliver and Martin Harris had a greater connection with them. And all sorts of people, touched them, put them in boxes. There was something there. I think that we have to agree. Even Dan Vogel, who's critical of this whole story, believes Joseph had something. He thinks Joseph fabricated the plates himself, but there was something there. There are so many testimonies of their existence. So it's not like they're, buried under the dirty laundry in the back room and never seen. They're present. They're a very strong presence all the while the translation went on.
Wow.
Sandra, you were laughing when he was saying it's a feminist issue about whether or not Emma got to see the plates. Why were you laughing about
Well, it
that?
has nothing to do with feminism. It has to do with who was gullible enough that Joseph Smith could convince to see them in a vision. It's the old emperor's new clothes story. Emma's the kid that's going to stand up and say the emperor doesn't have any clothes on. So you're not going to show her the plates. She's going to see through it. So you got to show the gullible people that you can get to have visions.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with feminism. Well, I mean, there may be feminists that make an issue of it, but it is not a feminist issue. It is a credibility issue.
Any other reactions to that clip?
Yeah, that's exactly. Well, I thought it was interesting that he mentioned Dan Vogel, proposing that Joseph Smith fabricated the plates, and he doesn't discount that.
Yeah.
But he doesn't say, and he doesn't use the witnesses, which I thought was really interesting. He could have said, well, there was 8 and 3 witnesses who saw the plates, so like we know that they were not fabricated. He doesn't say that. I think he knows that there's problems with the witnesses, but I thought it was interesting that he basically everything he said on that clip could have worked just as well for real plates and for fabricated plates.
Absolutely.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, absolutely. Couple comments we just have to read. Richard says Sandra needs a podcast. Call it Coffee with Sandra, Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. What do you think, Sandra? Do you want to do a podcast? I mean, you're only 82?
83.
83? Yeah, it's time to start a podcast.
Oh,
Sandra.
is that what it is?
Stephen writes, Emma lifted the plates with her spiritual arms.
Must have been.
And then Zelig reminds us that David Wright was excommunicated he was a BOE professor.
Yes.
He was David Bokovoy's mentor at Brandeis. He was excommunicated just for saying that the Book of Mormon was inspired but not translated. So check that out.
Wow.
Now Terrell Givens and Richard Bushman can apply the catalyst theory not just to the Book of Abraham, but to the Book of Mormon and not be excommunicated. Whereas back in 93, 94, 95, that was an excommunicable offense. Isn't that a double standard, Sandra?
Yes. Well, the church is morphing as we watch.
Yeah.
Really quickly, Dan Vogel writes, 19th century language carries theology that doesn't fit ancient America, but an anachronistic use of the King James Version is a serious problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or I mean, the issues are endless, third Isaiah and second Isaiah that we covered with David Bokovoy. That's just
Isaiah.
Yeah.
King James Sermon on the Mount from Matthew is a bit of a problem.
Well, just Christian baptisms before Jesus was even born. Why did the Lamanites and Nephites know the name Jesus and start talking about the Holy Ghost and Jesus and baptism and faith when they were Jews before Jesus was born? That it's the most ridiculous. It's ridiculous that we just spend hours or lives talking about this stuff.
Right. And Mormon scholars that are grappling with these things have to come up with some sort of theory that allows for Joseph to expand on the actual text that the Nephites would have written down and put in all these 19th century theological constructs into the story. But once you start allowing Joseph to include all these 19th century influences, then the question is, what was on the plates? Was it just that Nephi having been born of goodly parents and the rest is all just Joseph expanding on his theological knowledge? It just undercuts the whole historical record of what's the value of this book. Is it actually what the Nephites were experiencing, or is it just Joseph's novel?
Yeah, and it sounds a lot like 19th century Protestant sermons. Why are Alma and King Mosiah and King Benjamin preaching 19th century Protestant sermons?
Right.
Yes, it's a little odd.
It's anachronistic,
and it just happens to
problem.
solve all the main issues that were being contested at the time by the different churches, right?
Yeah,
And the
infant
problem-
baptism. Yeah, but why are they arguing about infant baptism?
Right.
Universalism.
No, no.
Before John the Baptist existed, by the way, right? John the Baptist wasn't born yet, and the Catholic Church, of course, hadn't been started yet, and they're arguing about infant baptism in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, and not only that, but also the issues, the religious issues that arise in Joseph's own family, right? Like
Mhm.
the universalism of his father, and how Joseph didn't think that was right. So the Book of Mormon becomes a really anti-universalist book, correcting his father's visions, and by as in the form of Lehi's dream, and so
There's that great.
Well,
Oh, go ahead, Julia. Go ahead.
I was just going to add that, like, and treasure digging is also in the Book of Mormon, where like the treasure slips beneath the earth and they can't get it
Yeah.
back, and the Lord cursed the land and things like that. It's all of it is in the Book
And
of Mormon.
somehow the Book of Mormon predicts that the prophet who's going to reveal the Book of Mormon is Joseph, son of Joseph.
Oh, yeah.
How did the Book of Mormon know, Sandra?
I wonder. I suspect the translator had something to do with that.
No, that proves the Book of Mormon is true, because it knows that Joseph, son of Joseph, would produce the book.
Yes, very hard to imagine.
And this is, again, Richard Bushman deserves a ton of respect. He's an amazing historian, and he is also playing a ridiculous role, betraying the discipline that he trades on and misleading a lot of people. It's both. It's honor and respect him, and he's doing a lot of harm and a lot of deception. And I'll just share a couple quick quotes. Half-Blood Prince writes, "Isn't it crazy that Bushman's one of the most decorated historians, and he's hawking a story about plates?" And then Colby Reddish writes, "Here's an easy tip. When you ask somebody a pretty logical question and they tell you it doesn't matter either way, they're probably peddling," I'll not use the word that Colby used, but something that isn't credible. I'll reinterpret what Colby is saying. It's just sad that a scholar of Richard Bushman's stature is stooping to this ridiculousness, because he's betraying the scholarship that he uses to bolster his own legitimacy.
Yeah. And all along, he plays into, like, he gives the impression, and I think for any member of the church, regular member of the church who watches this, are going to come out seeing Richard Bushman as someone who really believes in the angel and the plates and Nephites and Lamanites and the Amlicites and the dark skin that's on the like, he believes it all. That's the impression he gives. But then if we watch this last clip that we're gonna play, I think it really gives away how Richard Bushman is able to reframe truth to be able to believe all this stuff.
Yeah, truth is fungible, and he gives it all away at the end. So Dan Vogel, I got to share this quote. Dan Vogel writes, this is just classic Dan Vogel. It's too good to not share. Alma preaching against universalism using anti-universalist proof texts from the New Testament in BCE time, or before Jesus was born. How's that for summarizing the problem?
Is this a problem?
It's only a problem if you care about truth and if you care about evidence and history and facts.
Well, you just have to believe in rocks. That's a problem.
Technology.
The technology.
It's advanced technology.
Oh my gosh, we're gonna get so much hate for being so merciless. Are you worried that the scholars are going to be mad at you, Sandra?
Oh, they're always mad at me. It doesn't matter.
For mocking Richard Bushman?
I like him. He's a nice guy.
He's a great man. He's a gentleman.
And I think it's a real shame that he has to play a double game of appeasing the church position on the one hand, and yet really conceding the unlikeliness of the whole story on the other.
Yeah. All right. Well, we believe it or not, we've skipped a couple clips. Julia, what's the count? What are we at?
Oh, you know what? I lost count. Probably like 25 to 0.
Yeah, like literally, Richard Bushman is referee. He's saying Jeremy Runnells or the Mormon Church. Jeremy Runnells 25, Mormon Church 0.
I think he even gave Dan Vogel one. Right?
Dan Vogel 1. So it's Mormon Church. No, it's Jeremy Earls 25, Dan Vogel 1, Mormon Church 0. Okay, we've got a final clip here where Richard Bushman gives it all away. He tips his hand and he tells us, and it's kind of like a Carrie Mulstein quote here.
Yes.
Where he tells us what his foundation really is.
Mm-hmm.
Spoiler alert, it's not truth. It's not facts. It's not history. It's not evidence. And here is what he's basing it all on.
And be content with partial or imperfect truths. You're not going to be able to answer every question you have. For me, the key word is not truth in the knowledge sense, but goodness. It's the true way of life. What you want to do is be redeemed, to be the kind of person you really want to be, worthy to be loved. And so when you're seeking for truth, you want to also seek for personal growth, for redemption from your sins, for godliness.
So, Sandra, you're still a believing person. What do you think about this idea that it's not really about truth? It's about redemption and being a good person. He seems to say that's what it's really about. But does it have to be one or the other?
Well, honesty, I thought, came into this somewhere. It is. Oh, I'm lost for words. It's so astounding to make it this simplistic of truth. The whole thing they present the Book of Mormon to us is because it is truth. Joseph went out in the woods to pray truly. He saw God and Jesus truly. These were actual events. He dug up real plates. He made a translation of an actual history of the American civilization before the Europeans arrived. It's all presented by the missionaries as factual, and that's why we can have a testimony to the truthfulness of Mormonism, because it's all based on factual things. That's the way I was raised. It was all provable. Because it was reality. And now they're trying to say, oh, reality doesn't matter. You can't get all the answers. Well, the reason you can't get all the answers is because it doesn't make sense. And to say that those things don't matter is so belittling to those of us that took them at their word, that this was all truth. And now they're saying it's irrelevant because you're just seeking for good. If you found good in Mormonism, that's sufficient. Well, then any other claim is equally valid.
Yeah. What is outstanding to me is the Richard Bushman's definition of truth is the exact definition that Joseph Smith used to, I think, to justify lying to people and deceiving people. And he puts it right there in the Book of Mormon. And this is something also Dan Vogel points out. You know, I think there, on the last slide, I have the scripture.
It's Moroni chapter 10, verse 6.
Yeah. And it says, and whatsoever thing is good is just and true. Wherefore nothing that is good denieth the Christ, but acknowledges that he is.
What do you think that means, Gerardo?
So Joseph Smith's definition of whatever is true is whatever is taking you to do good. And that's how he was able to justify being able. I mean, I, like others, don't believe that Joseph was delusional and that he believed really that there was Lamanites and Nephites running around in New York. I think he knew that this was not true, but he was able to justify it or think that God approved of his methods because he would take people to do good. And that's the exact definition that Richard Bushman's using for truth.
Yeah. Do you have a comment on this, Julia?
I was just thinking about the first thing he said was he was like, be content, not having all the answers or something like that.
Yeah.
Like I in the church, I was really struggling with, like, I just had a lot of questions. I didn't have answers. And then once I allowed myself to look at other sources that helped answer questions, and by that helped me leave the church. I have answers now. I have far more answers now than I did out of the church that I did in the church. And I just think that's interesting because he's restricted to this little belief box, and there's not all the answers in there. There's just not. And so like if you step out of that and look elsewhere, you can find answers. And anyway.
Yeah. If truth is just goodness, then we don't need the word truth. Then we just
don't
talk about
need Mormonism.
Yeah. Yeah. Just be good. It's like Oprah. It's just like, be kind, be nice to people. Don't hurt people. Don't steal. Don't kill. Don't lie. Moses, like go to the 10 Commandments and just kind of stop.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And so that's ridiculous. I mean, I understand that he's saying what's most important is just to be kind. I agree with that. The most important thing is to be kind. But if truth is really just goodness, if the most important truth is just goodness, then we don't need the word truth. And we certainly don't need hymns like, oh, say what is truth, 'tis the fairest gem that the riches of men can produce, and priceless the value of truth will be when the proud monarch's costliest diadem will be casted as dross and refuse. We don't need that song. We don't need to be told, do what is right, let the consequence follow. All we need to be told is to be kind. And we certainly don't need to be told that Joseph Smith found gold plates and translated them, and that he had the Melchizedek and the Aaronic priesthood, and that we have exclusive authority and baptisms for the dead, and women don't get it, and prophets, seers, and revelators. No. Throw all that away and just be kind to people, which I actually agree with. So in a sense, I agree with Richard Bushman, but what he's not doing is acknowledging that we've been all sold for 10% of our income and the rest of our lives that truth is what matters, and that prophets, seers, and revelators won't lie to us, and that the official narrative that was given to us is true with a capital T. And we're taught when we're 2 years old to get up to the pulpit at sacrament meeting and say, I know this church is what? Not
True.
good, not good. What are we whispered in our ears? Our parents say, psst, 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 psst. Hey, say this. We get up. We don't go, oh, I have a testimony. I like to bear my testimony that I know this church is good. No, it's true. It's true. So Richard Bushman, I love what he's saying here, but he's enabling a mass deception when he tries to do this sleight of hand and switch what's important from true to good. And honestly, if you go back and listen to my interview with him on Mormon Stories, episode, 30, somewhere around there, he says the exact same thing, which I believe him. I believe that what he thinks is really important is if Mormonism has a good community, Mormonism has treated him well, Mormonism makes people be good people, and so none of the other stuff really matters.
If you're white and heterosexual, though.
Well, what do you mean?
Well, because it obviously damages a lot of other people. Like it damaged Black people for many, many years by excluding them from all the blessings of the temple, and LGBT people who are excluded all the time, just as recent as a week or two ago.
And don't forget women.
Yeah, and women.
Half of the church are excluded from so much. Yeah, like that's always been my biggest issue with Bushman and people like him. All the apologists, they don't acknowledge the harm that the church causes. And so by perpetuating non-credible explanations, using their credentials as scholars to perpetuate and enable the harm that's being caused, never hold the brethren accountable, sweep the harm under the rug or ignore it, and then make up harebrained, lame excuses for deception and dishonesty and corruption, they're enabling abuse and harm. And I know that's harsh on him, but that's what's frustrating. And I'm going to end with this. I'm going to bring it back to Jeremy Runnells, because Bushman says, be content. You're not going to get an answer to every question. How about an answer to any question? Like, they literally have given us no good answers to any of the questions. And that's exactly what caused Jeremy Runnells to write the letter to the CES director. He could not find any good answers, not some good answers, not mostly good answers. He found none. Did the CES director ever answer his letter? Jeremy, Sandra and Gerald, Did the CES letter
I'm not-
director
I'm
ever
Gerardo.
answer his letter?
Not that I'm aware of.
No, he got no answers. And to this day, the gospel topics essays don't give any good answers. They give crappy, partial, apologetic, drivelly answers that are deceptive and unsatisfying.
Yeah.
So there are no good answers. That's why Jeremy Runnells wrote the CES letter. He never got any answers back from the CES director. And that's why he went on to publish it and share it and improve it and market it, because he was representing all of us and he was standing on your shoulders, Sandra.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. For all of us that have gone through the great struggle of dealing with all that we were raised to believe was 100% direct from God. And now the Bushmans of the world are trying to tell us we are the problem. We took that too serious when that was what we were raised on. So of course we're disappointed when we find out the narrative is completely different from that.
How about outraged and rightfully,
yes.
rightfully outraged?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Rightfully outraged.
Agree.
So please, Jacob Hess, Maureen Proctor, all of you people, please keep denouncing Jeremy Runnells in the CES letter. Please keep doing more advertising. Please make the entire Mormon world more familiar than the CES letter than they otherwise would have been if you would have just been quiet about it and left it alone. But more importantly, keep advancing ad hominem attacks on Jeremy Runnells. And if for as long as you do, I promise you, for as long as I'm working on Mormon Stories podcast, I'm going to promote the heck out of Jeremy Runnells and the CES letter until you take down that garbage and stop attacking the victims. Stop attacking Jeremy. Stop demeaning people and saying that we're choosing to be offended, or not. And we'll just see how this ends up for you guys. And I'm curious to see how long their garbage lasts, because there's a chance they'll shut this. The church will realize how stupid this is to be promoting the CES letter and to be, violating Jeremy's trademark if he has one. There's a chance they'll shut this down. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Who knows?
I mean,
my stone is not giving me any answers today. I'm sorry.
All right, I've ranted enough. Colby, we got to share his comment. Colby writes, great episode. Thanks to all of you for this response to the interview. So glad to see Sandra again. Getting to give her a hug at Sunstone was a real treat for me. And then he says, stay caffeinated, John. I have no idea what does he mean, stay caffeinated?
Well,
I don't know what he means. What
he
does he
thinks
mean?
you've had a few cups today. You're pumped up.
I have not had coffee since about 6:30 this morning.
Oh, okay. Well, good for you.
Does it last 24 hours? Does it last 12 hours?
Well, I don't know.
I don't think so. I think it's
Mine hasn't.
I think it's Jacob Hess and Maureen Proctor, not Kevin. All right. Yeah. Anyway, final words, Gerardo.
Share this interview with this the CES letters before it's taken down with your family members who are believers. They need to know.
Yeah. Give all, please, all in the earshot of. Please give all your believing family members the CES letter and the website CES Letters and this interview. And while you're at it, Mormon Think and the entire LDS discussion series, along with the podcast, give them all this information and let them decide for themselves what is true. Julie, any final words?
Well, I've listened to Jeremy Runnells episodes with you. I've listened to the audio for his trial. And I think he's a very sincere person. I think he really, really wanted to know these answers. But what they're trying to spin or what they're trying to say is that he wasn't sincere. He was doing it in anger. First of all, faith crises kind of happen. I think they should do more research on faith crises or watch more of your episodes, because people don't just lose belief right away. It's a process. But also, even if he did write the CES letter in anger, these questions deserve to be answered. All the members of the church deserve answers to these questions. So I don't think, why go after Jeremy? It doesn't matter. Go after the things in the book. Answer some of the questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they can't because there are no good, right, Sandra?
I mean-
You've been doing this how long, Sandra?
60 years.
Are there good answers to the questions you've been asking for 60
Well-
years? Have you ever found a good answer?
No, and Bushman concedes you won't find the answers.
So stop looking for them. Focus on the goodness.
Yes.
Focus on what's good. Don't focus on the truth and the
Yeah,
answers.
right.
You won't really find the answers to all the questions. And what he means by that is any of the questions.
Yes.
Yeah, right?
I mean, he answered them by conceding every problem that the CES letter brings up.
Yeah. I mean, again, 25, 30, 50 to nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeremy
Right.
Runnells wins.
Right.
So checkmate.
If those are the
Jacob.
answers, I mean, I think most people are gonna not come to that side.
I got to share a couple more comments and then we're done. Dan writes, anger is a good thing when it leads to creativity. John Levitt says, donate to Jeremy in the CES letter. You can buy the CES letter. You can buy it as a Christmas gift for all your friends and family. Share it with everyone. Dan Vogel also writes, fun episode. Glad to hear these subjects getting out there. Minor writes, my husband met with our bishop tonight and told him that we won't be back. Thank you, Mormon
Ooh.
Stories podcast. We can't believe how we fell for all of this. And I'm just going to add, like Mormon Church, you're hurting yourself by giving bad answers, using ad hominem attacks, demeaning the people, and excommunicating the people who ask hard questions and tell the truth. Just stop it. If anything, just leave it all alone and just focus on goodness. But stop allowing your apologist attack dogs to deploy ad hominem attacks. It undermines the church's credibility and it advertises the arguments of the critics to which the church has no answers. Just in all the ways, Mormon Church, you're hurting yourself. Stop Jacob Hess, Maureen Proctor, for your own good. That's it. Are we done?
Awesome.
Are we done?
Nope.
Can we go home now?
Let's do it.
Thanks, Erin Himes. She says, love a good tirade. Was that a tirade?
Sorta.
All right. Well, Julia, thank you so much for putting this together. Julia, you're the
Yeah, of
best.
course.
Show yourself one more time.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And we've got more a teaser. We've got some art. We've got
Oh,
some really good
yeah.
art that we're going to be showing as a part of an LDS discussions. We're not going to give it away, but Julie, you've got more LDS discussions episodes up your sleeve. Is that right?
Absolutely. I'm excited about this next one. I think it's really interesting and it'll be really fun to talk about.
So stay tuned. Gerardo, thanks so much. You also helped co-produce and edit.
Yeah.
And I think this was successful.
Yeah, it was great.
Nice
It was
work.
super fun.
Good work. Sorry,
Thank
I
you.
got too ranty and Captain.
That's fine.
And Sandra, you're a legend. We will have you anytime you'll come.
Okay.
You doing okay? You're 83?
Oh, yes, I'm in good health. I'm doing well.
So are we going to get you for another 20 years? How long are we going to get you for?
Oh, well, yeah, I figure I ought to make it at least till as long as Nelson.
So we got another 17 years of Sandra.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, can we have you back on
We're
Mormon,
aiming on that. Yeah.
Can we have you back on Mormon Stories?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks, Dan Vogel, for being in the comments. Thanks for all the great comments. Thanks for all the super chat donors. But mostly, in addition to that, thanks to all the regular donors that just regular donate through mormonstories.org. They click on the donate button. They're monthly donors. That's why we're able to do this. That's how we pay our staff. And that's how we make all this happen. So thank you. If you value this type of content and you're not a donor, we would love it if you would become a monthly donor. We lose donors every week. And if we don't replace them, then we have to cut down our services. So please become a monthly donor at mormonstories.org. Also, we're looking for guests on Mormon Stories podcast. We've got a brand new website. Gerardo and Dave helped make it happen. Please go there. There's a new application process. We're looking for people who participated in the young single adult program, dating as an adult Mormon, and they want to tell their stories. We're looking for people to interview about that. We're looking for infertility stories. We're looking for grandparents who lost their faith as grandparents who are willing to come on Mormon Stories podcast. And we're always looking on best and brightest, top-notch star, super Orthodox Mormons that just want to tell their regular old faith crisis story. And we've got some great stories coming up in the weeks and months ahead. So thanks for joining us today. Be good to each other, be kind to each other, And I say these things in the name of Sandra Tanner and Gerald Tanner. Amen. And we'll see you all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories podcast. Take care, everybody.
Bye.